Seeing it's 6 p.m., I'd like to call the August 5th, 2020 regular meeting of the Kenai City Council to order. And if you would please, first of all, welcome everybody. If you would stay standing after the Pledge of Allegiance, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silence in recognition of individuals who lost their lives last week in a mid-air crash outside of Saldana. In particular for Representative Gary Knopp, who so effectively represented the city of Kenai during his time in the Alaska House of Representatives. Thank you. I'm sure other folks will be having things to express during their comments regarding last week's crash, so there will be further comments. I'll have a few words to say at that time also, but definitely still an emotional time. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel?
Here.
Councilmember Naxted?
Here.
Councilmember Petty? Here. Vice Mayor Malloy?
Here.
Councilmember Peterkin is absent. Councilmember Navarre?
Here.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Council, before we get to agenda approval, I'd like to call your attention to a laydown you should have in front of you with requested revisions to the agenda packet. Action, add item D1, ordinance number 3146-2020, amendment memo. This is requested by Councilmember Naxted. Action, add item D6, resolution number 2020-64, substitute resolution number 2020-64 memo, requested by the city manager. Add to item D8, resolution number 2020-66, amendment memo, requested by the city manager. And finally, add to item F1, ordinance number 3133-2020, replacement amendment memo, requested by the city clerk. Pleasure, Council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to approve the agenda with the requested revisions to the agenda packet listed by the mayor, requesting unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there any objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we have the consent agenda. Councilmember Naxted.
Thank you. I move for approval of the consent agenda, request unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there anybody from the or from the council that would like to amend the consent agenda at this time? Seeing none, we'll move it to the clerk, and please ask her to read the consent agenda into the record, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight's consent agenda includes the approval of the meeting minutes of the July 15th, 2020 regular meeting brought forth by the city clerk, approval of the bills to be ratified brought forth by administration, approval of purchase orders over $15,000 brought forth by administration, approval of non-objection to the renewal of marijuana licenses for Peninsula Botanicals, Kenai River Cannabis, Urban Extracts, LLC, and E-Strip brought forth by the city clerk. Introduction of ordinance number 3150-2020, waiving Kenai Municipal Code 21.10.130 lease execution and approving a lease execution extension to May 31st, 2021 to Schilling Rentals, LLC for Lot 5A, Block 1, FBO subdivision 2018 replat brought forth by administration with a public hearing on August 19th. Introduction of ordinance number 3151-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the Terminal Improvements Capital Fund and authorizing an increase to the construction purchase order to Blazy Construction Incorporated, brought forth by administration with a public hearing on August 19th. Introduction of ordinance number 3152-2020, accepting and appropriating a project-ready mini grant from the Alaska State Library for implementing the Know Your Neighbor Kindness Kits project at the Kenai Community Library, brought forth by administration with a public hearing on August 19th. Introduction of ordinance number 3153-2020, appropriating excess funds received from the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds, brought forth by administration with a public hearing on August 19th. And introduction of ordinance number 3154-2020, accepting and appropriating grant from the National Marine Fisheries Service passed through the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, accepting and appropriating additional insurance proceeds and awarding a contract for repair to the Kenai City Dock for damage caused by earthquakes in 2016 and 2018, and installation of a cathodic protection system to prevent corrosion, brought forth by administration with a public hearing on August 19th.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to any item that is on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll move, unanimous consent is requested. Is there an objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. Next, we have scheduled public comments, and we do have Mr. Bill Dunn here this evening to present on erosion mitigation for the bluff adjacent to Toyon Way. Mr. Dunn.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. You may remember that I spoke before you at a meeting last December and also in February when the council was in the process of updating the city's hazard mitigation plan. The December draft of that plan had identified bluff erosion as a prominent risk facing the city, but the draft focused exclusively on the mile-long stretch of the bluff within the river mouth, where the Army Corps of Engineers project is situated, or future project. I guess it's a project. I suggested that the hazard mitigation plan should include a broader recognition of the erosion hazard, which also affects the dunes on the north, south beaches near the mouth of the river, and the sheer bluff adjacent to Toyon Way. I wrote a letter, and my suggestions were largely incorporated in the hazard mitigation plan. I was pleased when the council adopted the plan. Tonight, I'm here to request council support for the city administration to commit time and resources to help Toyon Way homeowners form a local improvement district. The purpose of the local improvement district is to fund erosion mitigation measures. I wrote you a letter that you can find on page 5 of the packet. Just to get the scale of the problem in front of you, I have two aerial views of the bluff. The first is imagery from 2017. And I'd like to call your attention to a benchmark. Actually, it's sort of highlighted here. I don't know how visible that is for you all, but that's my neighbor. And there's that straight line is a walkway, and at the end of the walkway is a small platform. And this is 2017. You can see that the platform on either side of it has vegetation, and there's actually a little bit of a bench there. Today, that small platform is at the edge. All the vegetation below the lip of the bluff is gone. the entire lower bench that was there is gone. The extent of the erosion is even a little bit more than what that shows, because my neighbor in 2018 took 6 feet of the walkway out and moved the platform back. So it's even a little more than what that shows. The second aerial photograph is later than 2017, but I don't know the exact date. It may be as recent as this spring. And this photo highlights the properties most severely affected so far. My property is not in this view. This is further down the bluff, and the people at the very end are suffering the most. Some of their properties significantly gone. In May of this year, a pair of my neighbors obtained a proposal from a local contractor hoping to protect their property. The proposed scope of work is to construct a barrier at the toe of the bluff in an effort to stabilize the toe, encourage a less steep angle of repose as material sloughs to the bottom, and to promote vegetation to inhibit further erosion. The proposals seem to these neighbors practical and affordable, enough that they intend to build it this year. They're still working to try to build it this year. They shared the proposal with as many neighbors as they could reach, going door to door. It was clear to them, as it is clear to anyone, that a continuous barrier to stabilize the toe has a better chance of success than separate piecemeal barriers. One immediate result of my neighbor's initiative was the petition you can find on page 7 back. The petition asks the city manager to explore the feasibility of forming a local improvement district fund mitigation measures. The petition seeks a community solution for this difficult problem. Personally, I'm convinced that a unified approach that addresses the continuous length of the bluff and not just some properties without others will provide the best mitigation for everyone. I fear that piecemeal attempts will not be effective. But I was not sure how much support there would be in the neighborhood for looking at a local improvement district. As it turned out, more than half of the affected property owners signed the petition. In fact, I believe everyone we were able to contact signed it, and I'm not aware of any opposition. We presented the petition to the city manager and public works director in early June. The public works director and the city attorney also met with 3 of us in late July. We have discussed significant challenges, including cost and financing of effective mitigation measures, land ownership issues along the bluff, design needs for effective mitigation, maintenance needs and costs, effective signage and enforcement to prohibit the trespass on the bluff that has been so destructive in the past. Right now, there are still more questions than answers about how to address this problem effectively. We are not expecting an Army Corps of Engineers solution that would cost millions of dollars. We seek practical, affordable measures to inhibit the erosion and stabilize the bluff. Such measures include the following: signage and enforcement to stop the destruction of the bluff by heedless citizens. We've made progress there. There are some earlier signs this year than in the past, and some more substantial signs than in the past, and that should help. I do think that most people do the right thing if they know what the right thing is. You could hope figure it out themselves. Signs help too. A stormwater system on Toyon Way would be helpful to reduce uncontrolled runoff through the bluff face. I was actually surprised to learn that there isn't a stormwater system on Toyon Way. I certainly thought there was when I bought the house. Some type of structure to stabilize the toe of the bluff, an anchor, if you will, to hold the line. Vegetation on a more stable slope to inhibit further erosion. And maybe there are other mitigation measures that we haven't. We're looking for practical, affordable. We're looking for something we can do. About a dozen residential structures are at risk. The stretch of bluff at issue is approximately 1,500 lineal feet. Failure to mitigate this erosion will result in the eventual loss of all these homes. Such a loss will be significant enough that the city will notice it, to say nothing of the individual property owners. No one wants to lose a whole neighborhood by steady, slow motion and lack of effort. Property owners want to do something about this serious and growing risk. Time is running out. Our margin for successful mitigation dwindles every year. Please help us. Please turn the city administration loose to help us make a sustainable effort to mitigate this erosion. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Any questions for Mr. Dunn? Councilmember Petty?
With your engineering study from your neighbors, did they give a cost of what that, with them each doing it individually, what that cost per individual was, sir?
So it's not really an engineering study, it's a proposal from a contractor. It's based on the idea of drilling pipes, I think 8-inch diameter pipes, 15 feet for posts on either side, and then excavating and laying down horizontal pipes. And there was a quote, I think the quote is $400 a meal foot. If all 1,500 feet, it comes to something like $600,000. And I'm personally, I'm not married to that solution, but it's a great example of something that isn't imported riprap, it isn't sheet piling, an oil be able to do. It's something. It would be good to know what an engineer does think of it.
Any other questions of Mr. Dunn? Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, just a question. Along the toe of the bluff where you're going to, establish this barrier, I'm suggesting, looking at your drawings, there's probably enough erosion that the property owners actually do own down to the baseline where you're going to pin these pipes. There's no, in other words, there's no ownership issues with where you want to do your project, is there?
Actually, there is. I maybe didn't describe it clearly enough. The plan is to build the barrier actually 15 foot out from the existing toe, and the idea is to make a barrier, backfill, and give the eroding slough off a place to land. It is true that for some of the property owners, even 15 feet is going to still be on the property. It's not true for everyone affected, but it is true for some.
Who does own the property that you're going to use?
The proposal that was presented to my next neighbor down, Dave Salter, and they've been researching alternatives for many years, and this was the first one that they were able to lay hands on that seemed practical, affordable, and might do some good. Again, I'm not an engineer. I can't speak to it. Be interested to know what an engineer.
So just, I guess my real question is this, the ownership of the property and access to do the project, whoever owns the property, they're amenable to what you're doing, correct?
I think there are some issues there. I know that Dave and Sylvia have talked to there's that strip of land owned by the Lofstead estate. They're uncomfortable with permitting it, applying for a permit and allowing it. But the last I heard, there was some talk granting an easement or a right-of-way or something.
Yeah, so you have a path forward. Thank you.
We're working on it, yeah.
So is, Mr. Dunn, so the property that you just mentioned owned by the Lofstead, does it not show up on this,
Well,
or is,
I don't know if that's highlighted on that.
okay.
But I do have some plans out in my rig that I could.
Okay, no, yeah, no problem. I can pull it up on the GIS too, but it just didn't show it on this. So I presume that this was City of Kenai property below, but it sounds like there's a private owner that owns a strip below at the toe of the bluff, essentially.
Right, it's the same private owner who owns the land adjacent to the water treatment plant.
Okay, very good. Vice Mayor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Thank you, Mr. Dunn, for coming in and doing this presentation. And I want to say that I support the idea of, looking at a local improvement district for the area. And I'm happy to see that, the administration, the city manager, legal, maybe Public Works has met with you and you've had a dialogue and you've seen a lot of what the issues and challenges may be. So what's a little bit vague to me is the commit resources part of your presentation. Are you looking like for the city to do an engineering study prior to the local improvement district, and I'd also like to hear from administration like what type of resources, because certainly I think they are providing some resources, and there may be more that are needed, but it's not clear to me exactly what you're
Sure.
asking for in terms of that.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I think Mr. Naxted put together a flow chart for how the local improvement district process works. And where I see us in that flow chart is in the informational part. And it further on down that flow chart, there does come a time where we're going outside to an actual engineer. But more what I'm looking for right now is a response to the petition. So what is the feasibility? If we were to form a local improvement district, what's our budget? And what needs to come out of that budget? How do we handle maintenance after we build the thing? I mean, you can't just build a thing and walk away. I mean, I guess I'm looking for something like an answer. Can we do this? Can this work? Or are we just dreaming? And, if we're just dreaming, then maybe we should start the application process for disaster. I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like there ought to be a way to do something to slow this down.
And you had requested an input from administration?
Yes, because I support the idea, but the kind of LID I'm used to is where we can pretty much scope out ahead of time what it's going to involve, and so you're looking for help with scope and what the cost is going to be, because they're usually projects for like we've done in some of the subdivisions, and there's a 50% share and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe administration can help us with what their thoughts are.
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I'll give you my thoughts, and I think probably Mr. Bloom has some thoughts as well, because he's the one that met with Mr. Dunn most recently. And I agree with Mr. Dunn. It seems like there is something that could be done to mitigate this bluff erosion. there's so many unknowns right now that it's almost overwhelming when you begin to look at the project. Mr. Dunn brought up some of the issues that are there. In addition to that, there's some concern that are the assessed values of the properties in that area sufficient to support an LID? Several of them, their assessed values have been reduced significantly because of the erosion. And there's a limitation in the LID that only a portion of that assessed value can be used to support the LID. I believe it's 25% of the assessed value of the property is the maximum amount that you can assess on it. So that's a concern. The survey to actually define who owns the property down there is something that needs to be done as well. I think we all believe that the Lofsteds own the property where the structure would be. The reality is, without a survey, we don't really know if that is the case. The other, Mr. Dunn brought up, an engineered design would give us a lot more comfort than what we've seen from the contractor proposal. This is a significant bluff. Some of the structures, like is proposed for this area, have been used on the South Beach on a bluff that is far less than this one here. I'm not sure what the height of that bluff is there, but it's probably an 80-foot bluff or so. And on the south side, you're talking about a bluff that's maybe 20 feet. So we're talking about a 5 or a 6 foot structure protecting an 80-foot bluff versus a 5 or 6 foot structure protecting a 20-foot bluff. So again, there's just so many unknowns and questions that it's very difficult to know what the correct path forward is at this point, which I think is why we've been struggling a little bit, just because we're in this information gathering stage, but it's really difficult to even know what information you really need. If we had money set aside to look at this, we could get a survey. We could get an engineer to at least give us a preliminary idea of what we're talking about. Like Vice Mayor Malloy said, typically your LID is, you have a right-of-way, you're going to build a road, or you have an easement, you're going to put in a water line. These are things that are very easily quantified by Public Works. We can move forward. We can get an initial estimate that's simple. This is just so different than anything we've done before. It's difficult to without, like I said, without some money, some seed money here to really get started, it's difficult to know what the correct path is forward. So, and I don't know if Mr. Bloom has additional comments. Like I said, he met with Mr. Dunn most recently.
Mr. Bloom, do you care to weigh in?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. Just one thing that Paul said, and it's true that one of the concerns is certainly, depending on the cost of this project, whether the property values would be able to support at the assessment, because it is limited to 25%. But it does look at it, the code does say no assessment shall be levied in excess of 25% of the fair market value of the property after giving effect to the benefit accruing from the work or action for which assessed. So we would look at it as if the project had been built when making that calculation. But even still, I think it is one of the hurdles that we're looking at. This is certainly not a cookie cutter LID project. First of all, LID has to be for a public improvement, and that's in our city charter. And so unless the city has land ownership or interest, it wouldn't be a public improvement. The amount of financing, I think it's going to, how much seed money do we need to get started? What's going to make council comfortable as far as getting an engineered design? I think this project's a lot more complicated than paving a road or building a gravel road. So we really don't know what kind of magnitude of costs we're looking at. One thing that, I've shared with Mr. Dunn, and he has experience in public improvement projects, he knows that if this becomes a city project instead of a private project, the costs are probably going to go up significantly. We have to pay Davis-Bacon wages. We have to get an engineered design. So there's hurdles, and I guess, I encourage Mr. Dunn to come and talk to you, because I guess from my perspective, I don't know what else I can do for him at this point without having a plan to go forward or committing funds or something of that nature. generally the first thing we'd have to do in order to get to an engineer's estimate under an LID is to form a district. Well, we can't do that because the city doesn't have property ownership. So the district, we don't really have a project to start with to start that process the way it's typically outlined. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn?
I will say that, this is a developing story. I drafted the petition. When I drafted the petition, which I did the night that Dave and Sylvia approached me with their plan, at that time I did not know that there was no stormwater system on the street. And I bring that up because when we were thinking about forming a local improvement district, we were thinking about these, 12 structures and the property owners of that limited area of Toyon Way. If all of Toyon Way is missing a stormwater system, and if a stormwater system would be a bluff mitigation measure, it would also benefit, the entire neighborhood. And so I did leave it vague, what I'm asking for in terms of time and resources, because, frankly, I don't know. But I'm asking for some kind of practical help.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yeah, I'd like to try to help, and as you know, we've been involved in a bluff erosion, and whether there's another plan there. I've driven along that beach, and people have tried different stuff. Matter of fact, I don't know how some stuff is just getting thrown down there and built up, and they get to do that. If you see a lot of iron, and maybe it was their property and they got the permit, but if you've driven, maybe right in front of your properties there, but just a little further down, there's bluff erosion, personal projects that are going on. The good thing, I think, for all the property owners, and in your particular case, that is after the city's current bluff erosion project, this Toyon Way is probably the next impacted road that the city could see impacted at some point in the future. That would certainly be after those houses were impacted, of course, as you can see by the plans. But maybe there's going to be some lessons learned and some ideas that come out of the city's current process of where they are on that bluff erosion, even for some discussion on mitigating other things that could get discussed, and then we could go. I think you're going to be limited. I think the LID isn't going to work just simply because of the language. I think we're going to have to change it. I don't think there's enough tax the way you would read it. I think it'd come close just to maintain it, the cost, besides build it, but I could be wrong. And we're asking our city at this point, for all our city residents, because we're gonna have this current bluff erosion project need funds either from the city or through more bonds or those to procure that stabilization. I suppose I'm all right for a little money, but I just don't see how we in an LID, even participating 50% with you, is gonna come away, because I've struggled with the current bluff erosion project and can't, you know what, I've talked to different people like Davis Block. They were gonna, if you've ever been on a cruise, you see the kind of cement jacks and how they lock together, and you could put those, because there was talk of, is that a thing we should use instead of the rock on ours, and how long will it maintain, and how long will it stay on those type of bluffs? And that's why I said, I don't, and if you drive down the beach a little further, you'll see what people have done with riprap, iron and this and that. And essentially what we're gonna have to do, and you've seen it just on river property too. When you stabilize this, then the erosion starts on the one on this side or the one on this side a little bit more, and then now you have that issue. I guess I'm more for the administration getting back to the assembly on what ideas or possibilities there are, just to be honest with you up front before we get into a lot of costs. You know, do some analysis maybe on the assessed value in that. And then, but don't give up. I mean, I'll certainly, when the process of this bluff erosion is going, is say, is there any lesser models that we can start doing further up? Because I think the city does have, at some point, it gets impacted financially. We had a long struggle to get just this bluff erosion, and we got it with some cultural properties and some other issues that helped us reach some match. And I would hope that the city, if we could go forward, not only could get some grants that could help, because the city is going to be impacted, and it gets some benefit by you stabilizing that bluff, even if the homeowners pay a larger share. But I caution you that this is not an easy solution. You know, I mean, we didn't come to a conclusion, and it's taken us 30 plus, 40 plus years on this bluff erosion. So I wish you well. I would encourage you to talk to Scott Davis and just see what those jacks might cost you, and see what some of those do, some of that preliminary too. I don't know if that'd give the initial tow and give some initial protection, but anyway, I'll end my comments. I wish there was something like, because but I don't see it. I don't see it in our code. I don't think our LID is going to allow this one, or it's not going to fit within that square peg. Maybe we need to round it out.
Councilmember Knox.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill, for coming tonight. It's out of my engineering expertise, this sort of work, and actually somebody asked me to help on it, and there's no way, or even the local engineers would likely not also. It's a very complicated type of design. It's not just a structure that's holding the bluff back. It's a study that includes what the inlet is doing depending on different winds and all of that, and how it's going to affect the properties up and down, and it's quite a study. It's more than a lot more than what you're doing, and I guess the short of it is $400 or $500 a foot is cheap, and that's something that it just is. If the city gets involved, it's going to have to hire some kind of an engineer to study that, plus the design and all that. The cost it's not going to be just taking like a paved street, and rather than doing it privately, having a government agency design it, and it's going to go up 20%. It's going to go up a lot more than that, because it's going to be bulletproof as much as it can be. Just my opinion is the price is going to be astronomical by the time, comparatively to the $400. So we can certainly investigate that, but I think it's if you can keep it at the grassroots level, perhaps, and try to slow down that progression, is probably the most reasonable thing to do. It's going to fail in places. It has to be repaired, but it's the way a lot of the bluffs and the river banks and whatnot are being maintained and whatnot. But I guess I did have a question on stormwater in that neighborhood. Just brought it up. I was thinking that all those streets had they were paved and they had gutters, and the water must go somewhere. Is it going over the bluff, across the properties? How is the stormwater on the street impacting the bluff and how, because now that's starting to get into what a classic LID might be, you know,
Well,
stormwater.
if you walk along the bluff, I mean, you see seeps all along, and
Sure.
maybe you're gonna see that anywhere, but
Groundwater, yeah.
groundwater, and when you develop a subdivision, you're taking away area that absorbs rainfall. And you're producing water in bulk, and it needs to go somewhere. Well, it's going somewhere in bulk. And right now, there is a drain near the cluster boxes at near the end of Going On Way, but I'm told that is just a dry well. So the water sheet drains, I don't know where it goes. I mean, I know where it goes to that catch basin and it goes into a dry well.
Well,
At my end of the street, but it does at the other end of the street, I don't know.
yeah, and just be curious, you know, how the water coming out of the bluff looks as you go, I'd call it north, but I guess it's west, you know, beyond Toyon, where the construction ends. If there's, I just assumed that was groundwater that was coming from north of the airport and out there, you know, eventually kind of finding its way down and along. But, so you think it's actually coming from the street?
I'm not a hydrologist, but
Yeah.
it seems to me that, you know, a stormwater system would be best municipal practice when you develop a subdivision, because you want to control the water. And probably you're concerned about erosion if you don't control the water. This particular subdivision happens to have a bluff right next door.
Yeah.
So the erosion concern is even a little more critical, I would have thought, as a non-specialist.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Just a few other brief comments. What we have is, you know, a petition from a lot of our residents along the bluff and property owners and taxpayers, and I would support the administration giving us a report, you know, kind of like Councilmember Navarro was saying. You know, we've had a good verbal discussion, but that would say what the issues are, you know, and what a budget for seed money is if we were going to look at it further. So then there's something in writing too to go back to, you know, our residents that presented this petition to us. So I certainly would support doing that. I understand what Councilmember Nacksted's saying, and there may be a lot of negatives, and you know, that would be good for them to know it instead of to hear that verbal hearsay. And also, I kind of agree about the stormwater project, but the subdivision was done in stages, you know, and not all at once. And that is a capital project, and in a LID, sometimes residents can jump ahead of the list by doing an LID, but we have a capital improvement project list and budget and plans for that, so that's all got to work out or whatever. But I guess what I'm saying is I would support, you know, the resources to do a report back to council about it. Thank you.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes, Mr. Dunn, you'd mentioned in your presentation the thought or concept of a disaster declaration. Is that just a Hail Mary thing, or is that something that maybe you could do and work a parallel path, and funding and advice could be developed from that? I don't know myself.
I'm looking at an asset I have that's significant turning into a liability at some point in the future. I mean, I said in the letter, I didn't say in these comments here tonight, we know what will happen if we do nothing, because much of it has already happened. There's no mystery about where this is going to land, or it's going to end. And so I bring up disaster relief because at some point it's going to be a disaster. It's going to be an embarrassment. And, you know, maybe you all won't be in office, but it's going to be an embarrassment for whoever is when it happens. So, I mean, I think it's a long-range thing I throw out there. I'm not prepared to fill out the paperwork now, but I mean, I think that's where it's headed.
Just a thought, if you had the, you know, the paperwork, you could at least get the concept, you know, and you'd have you'd know what was involved with it. And the verbiage, the terms, the parameters of a disaster might help you formulate your ideas working with us. It would be a tool for you to use. That's my only suggestion.
Sure, appreciate it.
Yeah, I have several questions and some comments. One, I had, Mr. Bloom did answer one I had regarding, you know, city-owned property, you know, how that would work with the LID. So that was kind of pretty clear answer. I kind of agree with, you know, Councilmember Navarre that this has to be, you know, with the way our current code is, that it might not work that way. You know, when you look at this, and sir, I'm not, you know, certainly empathize with your situation. I mean, you're seeing your property, you know, trickle away, and that's probably not a very good feeling. But it's not the fault of the city that this is happening. It's the fault, you know, it's an act of God, I guess, more than anything, of Mother Nature, or however you want to call it. I was just going to ask you, have you driven Kalafonsky Beach at all? Have you taken a ride? Okay, so you've seen some of the mitigation efforts that have been put forward by a lot of the folks that own property in those areas. Okay, because I spend quite a bit of time down there, and I see there. A good friend of mine bought some surplus sheet pile from the Port of Anchorage that had got rejected when they pulled that out, and that's what he used, and he's using it for other folks' barriers. But you probably saw, you know, concrete rubble that was just thrown down there. That's a terrible idea. I commercial fish there, and that stuff's migrating all over the beach. It's got rebar in it. You know, it's tearing up nets. It's I'm watching out all the time so I don't pop a tractor tire. And you know, you got kids bombing up and down with four-wheelers. That, you know, it's not a very safe situation. And so you probably saw the gamut from what kind of works to what absolutely doesn't work. And you know, when you looked at one of the things that I've seen that does work, now granted, it's as Mr. Ostrander pointed out, is that pipe, the pipe wall that you're referring to is next to where I commercial fish, and that actually is held up pretty good. That was put in probably in the 80s, I suppose, and it's still doing well. And I think Bud Crawford, closer to the mouth of the river, on his property, had put in some wood, same type of design, only used wood structure, wood logs and things like that. And that apparently has done very well. So I guess, you know, my question, my thought is, I don't mind administration coming up with a report and doing what we can to help you, but I think there's also that you guys should, or the neighborhood, in agreeing that, you know, what works is a continuous structure instead of piecemeal, you know, to work on, you know, keeping something moving along, because like you said, the time is of the essence. As Councilmember Naxted said, when you throw out $600 a foot for that structure, I thought that was actually pretty reasonable. And at any rate, the last question I have, Mr. Dunn, is there any possibility of your homeowner's insurance covering any of the costs that might be associated with, you know, as a mitigation, or do they wait till your house falls over? Or, I mean,
No, I think they stop insuring you at a certain point.
oh, is that right? Okay, I was just curious. Okay.
I believe there are some properties, I believe the condos are not insurable at this point. There are condos at the end of Toyon Way. They can't sell them with financing because they can't get insurance.
Sure, okay. And there's probably not too many people willing to plunk down cash for something that
I'm not thinking that they're going to be real enthusiastic.
Sure, yeah. But at any
Mayor
rate, I
Gabriel.
guess, Councilor Navarre.
If the administration is going to look at it, one other question I'd like just to help out. If we were to participate in an LID or whatever, can we participate and let them do the work? That would be another legal question of whether that's allowed. In other words, if the city was to participate in some way, is that legal also, or would we have to run the project? And as you've heard up there, when we do that, the cost can be, but if you can just flesh that out when you get back to us with just a kind of a concept of where we're going, and that will give you at least some response from the city, I hope, at least initially, on how to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to thank the council for taking it seriously and at it. I'm not cast in stone on any of the things that I've suggested. I'm groping for a solution here. I'm looking for an answer. I think what my neighbors did in taking the initiative is really praiseworthy, and maybe I join them if the neighbors on either side of me do it too. But I just, based on, and I think you all recognize it too, I just feel very confident that if maybe the LID is not the right way to do it, but some kind of a community involvement or some kind of buy-in from the city. Maybe it doesn't need to be a local improvement district. Maybe it's guidance. Maybe you create something. I don't know. I mean, it is a fairly unique situation. I'm not jumping up and down saying, how come you haven't solved it yet? I'm trying to solve it. I'm trying to find ideas and things that are practical. And what I'm hearing, at least from you all, is that you're willing to look. And I appreciate that.
Councilmember Nexted.
I got a question, I think for Mr. Bloom, or regards to LIDs, and guidance, and sometimes it is kind of doing the coordinating and some of that, and then there's the finance part, but I think that, can the city assist with helping form an LID silent of funding, or is that an absolute that it has to be? Because I see where, we could probably do maybe some estimations and all that, but, just coordinating the neighborhood, the neighbors that aren't necessarily directly involved, like the Lofsteds or something like that, just being kind of the director here a little bit. Is that within our scope?
Mr. Ostrander or Mr. Bloom, whoever feels appropriate. Yeah. Guess you guys could flip a coin on.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I guess I'll take that one. We certainly can provide help in whatever way we can. I'm not sure that fits within the LID model, what you're talking about specifically. When Mr. Dunn originally came to the city and talked to us about this, my initial thought was, because it appeared that there was definite interest amongst the neighborhood to do this, that the city could essentially be what was a financing mechanism through the LID process. I told Mr. Dunn that I wasn't confident that there was going to be any sort of contribution towards the wall from the city. We're allowed to contribute up to 50%, but that the LID would strictly be a financing mechanism. So that was why I originally wanted to explore this. What you're describing, Councilmember Nackstead, is something we can certainly do. I just don't think it really fits within the LID framework.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of brought that up is I think if we were able to do a true LID, then the cost is going to go. So it's just my opinion. Of course, you're going to come up with some recommendations for us, but I'm just looking for is there like another route we can go? Maybe it's not as desirable as you're hoping for, but it's along those lines.
I picked the LID because it just seemed in general, without looking at technicalities, as an applicable thing to do. But I can see where maybe it just doesn't fit. Maybe the model just doesn't fit. I'm looking for help.
Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. One thing that Mr. Dunn brought up is that, a wall is going to require ongoing maintenance. It's not something that you just build and it weathers the storms without continual upkeep. In Homer, you may or may not be familiar with, they have a special taxing district. They have a seawall to the south of Bishop Beach, the south end of Bishop Beach, that I think was at least primarily built by private individuals, and then the city stepped in and created almost like a special service area, and they tax those properties a little more. The city uses that money to maintain that seawall every year. That's something the city could do in the future as well, but it's also something I think Mr. Dunn knows, but all those property owners should be aware too, that it's not gonna be a one-time cost. I mean, whatever gets built down there is gonna need continued maintenance. I think the contractor even spoke of that, some rates to keep bringing more sand in every year and that kind of thing. So that is something, if a wall was built, and whether it was built by the city or not built by the city, that's something else to look at going forward as a part of this, as some sort of special taxing district.
Sorry, I think the big advantage of something similar to the LID concept is, I understand or looking at this, I presume there's people that aren't really that interested in participating, some property owners there.
You know, I said that, actually, one of the signatures on the petition is an owner of the, one of the condos, but, I mean, I think we won't get everybody. And actually,
Right.
Lofsted has a couple of undeveloped parcels there. I mean, would they pay for a Lofsted
Yeah,
location?
so there you go. I mean, you're trying to build this continual wall to,
Right.
and you know, if you do it, and then you do it just because that's the right thing to do, and other people don't pony up, you know, you're basically subsidizing their property too, so.
Well, but if it isn't continuous, it's just gonna get washed away.
Absolutely, no, that's my point, and sometimes it can make it even worse. Or maybe not make it worse, but accelerate, I guess,
Handling,
yes,
yeah.
exactly, so.
Oh, I think all that's true. I mean, well, I didn't mean to take up so much of your time. I do appreciate your looking at it, and thank you for allowing me to come to you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody from the general public who'd like to address the council at this time on any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda?
For anyone that is online that is interested in speaking, you can use the raise hand feature or *9 on your phone.
Quite an entrance in there. Hi, Marion Nelson, 44629 Tower Hill Street, 200 feet outside the Kenai city limits. Wish we were attached. Well, I'm currently the president of the Art Guild at the Kenai Fine Arts Center. And just here for a couple of reasons. One, to applaud the city for its continued support or public works efforts with the items that are on your upcoming ordinance. Is that right? Ordinance coming up? Yes, with all the assistance for the visitor center and rec center and various other things. And I would like you to consider including the art center in that we have the plans that we talked about a couple of years ago that are $5,000 worth of plans. The city had agreed to pay $3,000 and we would pay $2,000. So we have structural plans here from Nelson Engineering and Can-A, the architects in Kluge's office. They are as current as they can be. There's obviously things that we would like to, or things that would need to be tweaked in the future, but this is the thing to look at for right now. Our current board members are myself, Leslie Morton, as vice president, Abby Hewlin, who's here tonight, Karen Fogarty, who's here, and she's our treasurer, Heather Floyd is camping with her family, and Rachel Grossel, and then online is Mick Wycus right here, our newest board member. So we just want to thank you for assisting the development of projects in the city, and we would appreciate you considering the renovation of the back part of the Art Center as you move along.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson.
Sure.
Any questions?
So here's a copy for everybody.
Oh, very good, thank you. Is there anybody else from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time on any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda? Oh, Mr. Wykus, would you like to comment? Did you have to unmute?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm Mick Wykus, and I live at 36887 Chichaco News Drive in Soldotna. As a new member of the Kenai Fine Arts Center Board, I just wanted to echo Marion's support of Ordinance 3126-2020 and hope the city and the council will consider the motion supporting KFAC projects that we understand will be presented tonight when it comes up on the agenda. I'm honored to be a board member for the Kenai Fine Arts Center. It's such a valuable organization and facility on many levels in Kenai and also in the Central Peninsula. I want to say thanks to the council and the city for their past and continued support and contribution to the success of Kenai Fine Arts Center. I really appreciate your support as a user, benefactor, and now as a new board member. Thanks for letting me speak to you this evening.
Thank you. And actually, we kind of jumped out. This testimony probably should have been under 3146-2020, but we're still under. And thank you, Mr. Wykus, for your comments. Right now, we're at anybody that would like to address anybody or would like to address the council on any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda. Okay, very well. And this is our first ordinance anyway. I don't think it's going to have any problem getting introduced. So with that, we'll move to public hearings. Ordinance number 3146-2020. Increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the general fund, library improvement capital project fund, visitor center improvement capital project fund, municipal roadway improvements capital project fund, Kenai Recreation Center improvements capital project fund, Information Technology Improvements Capital Project Fund, and City Hall Improvements Capital Project Fund to fund capital projects deferred during the 2021 budget process. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Naxted.
I move to enact ordinance 3146-2020.
Second.
Thank you. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to ordinance 3146-2020? I think the previous comments can be associated with this ordinance. Seeing no additional comments, we will bring it back to council. Comments, deliberation from council? Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I do have an amendment that Councilmember Peter can co-sponsored with me. I think you have it as a laydown. Before I read it, I guess I should ask the clerk or Paul, should I also change the numbers in section 1 of the ordinance to reflect the increase?
Yes.
Okay. So, essentially, I know my memo, reflects 100,000, and I'm gonna move that at this time, but my intent is after it moves, and that change is made, I'm gonna ask for an additional 20,000, but I'll get into that later. But I wanted to be full disclosure for you on that. But so, my amendment would be in section 1 at this time to change $1,445,000 to $1,545,000. In both those places, where it says increased estimated revenues under section 1, appropriation of fund balance, that number would be $1,545,000, and also transfer to other funds, $1,545,000. And then I would move to add a new section 8 that would read section 8 that the estimated revenues and appropriations be increased as follows. Kenai Fine Arts Center Improvement Capital Project Fund, increase estimated revenues, transfer from general fund, 100,000, and increase appropriation construction by 100,000. And I would also renumber sections 8 and 9 to 9 and 10. And I would request unanimous consent.
Second?
No problem with that, Councilmember Navarre, but just under the, in the section where it lists every project, would you want to add the fine arts to that list?
Thank you. I did forget in the title, that was another one that came to me at the, yes, in the title after the Information Technology Improvement Capital Project Fund, there'd be a, is that a comma? Or a asterisk, I don't know. And I'd add the language, Kenai Fine Arts Center Improvements Capital Project Fund in the
Second.
title also. Thank you.
Thank you. Does everybody understand the amendment? Any discussion? Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the amendment is approved. So we now have before us ordinance number 3146-2020 as amended. Councilmember Navarre, do you have your light on, or?
Sure. I know Councilman Naxted has an amendments that I agree with. But I would at this time ask that in section 1, the new number would read $1,565,000. That the section 8 would increase the 100,000 to 120 in both the transfer to general funds and increase appropriation to construction. So those would be the only two, or those would be the change. And I'll leave it there, and then I'll speak to it if I get a second to raise that to 120,000.
I'll second that.
And just to be clear, this is an additional 20,000, not an additional 120,000?
Correct.
Okay, very
That
good.
would just change the number, so it's additional 20 from where it's amended at this point.
So that amendment's on the floor, Councilmember Navarre. if you'd
Thank
like to
you.
speak.
In talking to the representatives at the Fine Arts Center, and I wish I would have asked them the question, and I know Marion's still here, but I had some discussions with her, and they're proceeding with an approximate cost of $12,000 plus in doing the windows and proceeding with that improvement ahead of this project. And they're gonna be putting those in because they're already along and they already have a good price. They've really flushed that out, and they're just gonna move ahead, and they have a contractor ready and they have the funds in their account. Thanks partly to what we were able to give them in our grant process. But they're gonna proceed with that. And as my memo said in the beginning, and as Councilman Naxted will do, with that plus the 30,000 that is left over to match, if, let's say, the bids go to 150,000, they're putting in a third in the total cost. They'd be almost at 50,000. So I just want to make this a doable project since we're this close. And it might even require the city to, if it's allowed, to let them possibly bid the job as a whole and maybe save. I don't know if that's possible yet, but if it isn't, the city benefits by this asbestos removal and some of that, and we don't even know what some of that is. And I just want a little more contingency to give them a little breathing room. And since we're dealing with it now, and then they'll know what they're up against if the bids come in a little bit more. But I really want to support the arts in our community and and not have to have it come back before us. So I'm hoping you'll agree to at least another 20, and I think we can get there. Even if we have to bid the project in such a way that you do add alternates. In other words, I know they have some wishes for some studio lighting or art lighting and some other stuff that could be costly. That might have to wait to another time, but I think the bathroom and the asbestos and the other aspect of the project. So I just ask for your support for this additional 20, and let's see where it goes. Thank you.
I got a quick question of administration before we move on. Is there, and I know they've applied for a grant that it had to do with, but nothing with that had to do with the new construction. I know there's some remodeling going on with the bathrooms. That's pretty extensive in this. I guess my question is there COVID money that can go towards some of the retrofit of the bathrooms to, and I'm, there's sanitizing issues with the bathrooms they have, not sanitized, but to bring them up to code. I guess I'm just wondering if that could be used as capital improvement from the COVID money for at least part of this for the bathroom portion.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. We looked at the possibility of this improvement qualifying under the federal guidance, and we felt that it was likely a stretch. And one of the primary reasons is because this is a project that had already been underway, had been being designed for several years. So to then indicate once you get the CARES Act money that we're going to use that for a project that had already been planned, not in response to COVID, but just because it was a project that needed to be done, that it likely didn't clearly meet the federal guidance. So we stayed away from using CARES Act money specifically for the project.
Okay, thank you for that. So we do have an amendment on the floor for an additional 20,000. Councilmember Naxton.
Yeah, I'm in support of an extra 20% on top of that. There's plans that are well, I haven't looked at them, how complete they are, but I know the consultant has been looking at them for some time, so I think that they can be completed fairly soon, and then we'll kind of really know what the ultimate cost is which really what I'm more concerned about, once we get to the end game here. But it is a city facility, city-owned building. We've got a good tenant in there, and it's also valuable to our community in many ways. So an extra 20,000 on top of that, so I'm not going to quibble about.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yes, I too will be supporting this in its totality. My only thought is that before we get going, we have a full scope of work outlined so that we know all the discrete parts and how the funds are intended to be applied. And that will perhaps eliminate any surprises, and will give us a chance to review one more time to see if we've forgotten anything. That's my only request. I don't want to see a drip. I think we have it well thought out. I just want to confirm that understanding.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Glenn. I think Councilmember Naxton actually has a amendment memo in the laydown that sort of, I think, it mostly addresses probably what you just mentioned. Vice Chair Muller.
So I guess I'd request unanimous consent of the amendment.
Very good. Any objection to unanimous consent to adding $20,000? Seeing none, that amendment is approved. I'll move to Councilmember Naxton.
Okay, I'd like to make an amendment. It's in the laydown for everybody if you've got a chance to look at it. And we'll amend it to match the 120 that we just approved. We'll be adding a new section 9, which will state that the funding for the Kenai Fine Arts Center improvement be restricted as follows. 1, if the engineer's estimate for the project exceeds $150,000, the appropriation should be brought back to the council for reconsideration. Number two, the $150,000 appropriation must be committed or encumbered by November 10th, 2021. And number three, the $150,000 may only be used for construction at the Kenai Fine Arts Center. Later section in the ordinance will be renumbered accordingly.
Second?
Any discussion on the amendment?
Just a
Oh, I see.
clarification, and the clerk could tell me, but renumbering the other sections would probably occur, correct? By
Yeah,
your
I
motion?
think he did mention that, he did.
Yeah, it's in
say
the
that it's in the
Oh,
memo,
sorry.
so-
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just wanted to be clear, the appropriation was 120,000, not 150.
120,000.
So for both,
Yeah.
number two and number three, it would be
Be 120, not,
120,000?
I think I just said 150, didn't I? Yeah, that's the other number.
So if you,
Yeah.
the second would concur with the correction.
Okay, very good.
Just for further clarification, Mayor, if I could?
Yes.
So in section 9, the first one would still read 150, and then the next two would read 120.
The $150,000 is extracted from your memo that said that's the high end of what you expect the estimate to be. So since we don't really have an estimate, other than, I'm not sure where that number came from. There was, but it wasn't an engineer's estimate, so that's why I used that number.
Sorry, I was just clarifying that the first number would still read 150, because that does impact when it comes back. And again, if the engineer estimate, that just means it's back before us, and as I spoke earlier, I'm hoping that we can split the project into add alternates so that the bid would, that's why it would come back before us, as Councilmember Glendenning stated, and your motion, I think, intent is so that it'll fit within the parameter of the funds and get spent in the appropriate amount of time.
Essentially, yes. And since the plans haven't been completed, we don't have an engineer's estimate. If let's just say the estimate comes out to 300,000, I'm just throw a really high number, we're all surprised. Well, I think that's a good time for it to come back before it moves forward, and then the council's all aware and reviews it. Because it'll be a different move forward then.
Mayor, if I could just follow up, I just want to clarify that, an engineer estimate based on the plans could fit it within and then have some add alternates, and still, fall within that 150, since that's why I wanted to make sure that reads 150, because that gives them some parameter on how to build in the project going forward. If you understand what I'm saying, if they have to leave out the lighting as an add alternate one for the art gallery, is that fit within the scope? But I'm willing for it to come back to the council after they get it designed and us figure out what to do, if that's the case. So I'm okay. I think you're going to see this back before us before the end of the year, and we'll get it figured out. So thank you.
Any other further discussion on the amendment made by Councilmember Nexted?
I'll request unanimous consent if it hasn't been requested yet.
It has not. Is there any objection? Seeing none, that amendment is approved. So we have ordinance number 3146-2020 as amended on the floor. A vote to approve. This is the entire, we've been discussing the amendment for the Fine Arts Center, but this is also for the entire ordinance as amended. So any further discussion? Councilmember Nexted.
If I could, not to take it too late, I do appreciate the memo that's attached that includes photos and cost estimates and a breakdown of all the different projects and how they would advance and what they're for. And it's very helpful in understanding the rec center water heater replacement. There's a picture there. That's what I'm looking at now. like photos, but there's also the information right next to it. It's easy to read and it's not too voluminous. Very good, thank you.
Any further discussion on ordinance number 3146-2020? Councilmember Navarre.
I too just want to thank the administration for finding a way to bring this back to us. As you know, last year we canceled our capital projects and did that, and because our city's going to need it, some of our contractors and that are going to need the jobs and the work, and we need to do maintenance and capital projects in our city. We know we're not going to get a lot of funds from the state in the future, and I'm just glad we were finally able to institute this capital project fund going forward. So I give the administration a lot of thank you and kudos for finding a way. So I know Paul and Terry and Scott worked on this hard, so thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to just piggyback on the comments my colleague set up here, because when COVID hit, we did have the work session on our capital improvement projects. Plan was very well done, and COVID hit and the brakes went on and everybody went, that was sort of the low-hanging fruit. There was so much uncertainty. So it makes me feel good that we're sort of kind of starting to move that ball forward again, because we can't stop forever. I mean, we need to do the improvements we need to do to the city and move forward. So it's good to see that. I appreciate the work on that. As far as the Fine Arts Center goes, that is a city building, and it's an anchor to Old Town. It draws people in. That's a goal of ours, is to develop that into, I think it fits very well down there, sort of theme, and I think that things can grow around that. I'm still wanting to see a brewery down there at some point, maybe in Old Town, and get some of that, more of an entertainment district. So, I'm glad to see we're moving forward with that, and hopefully that part will turn out well. So, with that, I'll close my comments. Any other comments, discussion?
Mayor?
Oh, sorry, Councilmember.
I was wondering, and I don't want to take away any of his, the city manager's report, but is there anything you want to mention on additional fundings that were made available? You want to wait? Just
Mr.
specific to, I know that there was a Rasmussen grant, but it might be something you want to talk about later. I just thought everybody, since we did include the additional item, and by what we did on some of the COVID, I didn't know when the best time. I don't want some of these people maybe to leave after this ordinance or online and not hear some other good news that the city manager or the administration worked for and got accomplished. So I'll leave it up to him where he wants to bring it up.
Mr. Ostrander. I hate to put you on the spot.
I'm thinking maybe I should bring it up now. It wasn't a part of my city manager's report, and the reason is because it's not 100% for certain yet, but it's virtually certain. So it's right after our first round of grants went out, and we were able to award grants to both nonprofits and businesses in the community. Rasmussen came out with an announcement that they were going to provide $250,000 in funding, in matching funds for municipalities that provided CARES Act money to arts within their community, arts organizations within their community, up to $50,000 in each community. First come, first serve. Well, we were, as you know, City of Kenai was on the forefront of this, so we were able to get up in the front of this thing. We immediately put in for $50,000 worth of funding through the Rasmussen. We received notice that we'll get the full $50,000, and of that $50,000, $10,000 will be going to fine arts. So it will double your grant from $10,000 to $20,000. And there's 4 other arts organizations in the community that will also be getting $10,000 grants in addition to what they got through our CARES Act. So it was, again, Larry personally was the one that spearheaded it. I got to give him the credit for it. He saw the opportunity. He took advantage of it, immediately got the application in, and we got the full $50,000. Since then, Rasmussen realized that $250,000 wasn't enough for the entire state, and they increased it to 500,000 for the whole state. But even with that, the city of Kenai getting 10% of that money was a real win.
Wow, very good. And, yeah, I gotta tell you, the Rasmussen Foundation and the people behind that, they, you know, they've done well all over the state, and certainly thank them for their work in that regard. There's a lot of things that somewhat fall through the cracks or may be underfunded somewhat. So with that, ordinance number 3146 as amended before us. No other discussion, I see. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxted?
Yes.
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We're on item D1, ordinance number 3147-2. Yeah, okay, very good. Let's take 10 minutes. I'd like to call our meeting back to order, and council, we're on item D1, ordinance number 3147-2020, accepting and appropriating $2,135.25 an asset for forfeiture, sharing funds for purchasing law enforcement equipment into the general fund, police department. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to enact ordinance number 3147-2020.
Second that.
Is there anybody from the general public who'd like to speak to ordinance number 3147-2020? Seeing none, hearing none.
If there's anybody online that would like to speak to this item, please use the raise hand feature or *9.
Very good, thank you. We'll bring it back to council. Comments from council? Deliberation? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Naxted,
Yes?
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning,
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. Council, we're on item D3. Ordinance number 3148-2020, accepting and appropriating a Meals on Wheels COVID-19 Response Fund grant, round 2 from Meals on Wheels America for Kenai Senior Center expenditures in support of its response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Naxted.
I move to enact ordinance 3148-2020.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3148-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments, deliberation from council? Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Just want to thank Meals on Wheels America for the additional grant.
Thank you, and I will echo your comments. I was going to say something, and you beat me to the punch. I appreciate that. Councilmember Naxted. I'm sorry, Councilmember Glendenning.
I thought he was reading my mind.
I am.
I'm looking at you, but I'm calling on Councilmember Glendenning.
All right, yeah, I'm glad and grateful for this recognition too. Just what I read now, coming from the senior center, is that there's just a tremendous demand and a useful application of these services and funds for the people in our community, and it's really appreciative of myself and my cohort that such a program is available. I can't put a numbers concept to it because it's a rolling volume of funds within this budget item. But I know everybody that is requesting or wanting this service is being taken care of, and it is expanding, but it's within good reason and within how we manage. And again, I'm thankful for this. Thank you.
Councilmember Naxted.
Just a question that, if you can't answer it, Paul, I'm just curious. This is the second time we've had one of these, but it's the COVID-19 Response Fund, and I don't know if that's CARES Act money that's gone into something that's called that, or if it's something different than CARES Act. Or if there's any other strings attached, or what is it? Where does it originate?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gable. Councilmember Naxted. I don't know the answer to that question. I would assume that it was a part of the CARES Act package, that Meals on Wheels got these funds and were allowed to distribute them. As far as the strings attached to the money that the Kenai Senior Center is receiving, there's no strings. It's specifically to support our meals program, which right now is the primary service that we're providing as a senior center.
Perfect, thanks.
Any further discussion on ordinance number 3148-2020? Seeing, hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning,
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Naxted.
Yes?
Motion passes.
We're on item D4, council ordinance number 3149-2020, accepting and appropriating a grant from the Federal Aviation Administration and authorizing the purchase of property described as Lot 5 Spruce Creek subdivision, which is an airport's runway protection zone, brought forward by administration. Councilmember Naxton.
Move to enact ordinance 3149, 2020.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3149-2020? Seeing or hearing none, we will bring it back to council. Comments from council? Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you. Yeah, I support this ordinance. I'm happy to see it. The city does need to purchase property to minimize noise, et cetera, for airport operations. And I'd also like to encourage administration to look at acquisition of other property on the west side of Floatplane Road that may be available for sale for similar purpose. That's been discussed in the past. Thank you.
Councilmember Naxton.
Quick question on the, in the memo, it breaks down how we got up to the 25,800, and I was curious, the $6,600 to update the airport layout plan, it's a pretty good chunk of the overall cost. What's involved with that? Is that a map, or is it must be a lot more than that?
Mr. Ostrander.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Naxted, it is a lot, and I don't know what that's for. I'll have to check and get back to you.
Any further discussion on ordinance number 3149-2000? Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I have a similar question. The appraisal fee is $2,600 for a $16,000 piece of property. Why is that so high?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenning. That was the cost of the appraisal for that property. Appraisals can run and be quite expensive in some cases, particularly I think when you're talking about commercial property or properties that are being purchased by the government.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, there are no comps. There's no track record with these properties or surrounding properties. Is there anyone else that can appraise, or are there only some people that are qualified to do this type of appraisal? This seems like a lot of money for a $16,000 piece of property. That's my observation.
Yeah, so I'll speak to that.
Mr. Ostrander.
Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, it was conducted by a certified appraisal, so it has to be an appraiser that's certified in the state of Alaska, and there are just a handful of those. Through the FAA, you are required to go and follow our procurement code, which means we go out and put out an RFP, and we get competitive bids for the appraisal. So I have not seen this appraisal specifically, and I was not involved in the process to procure the appraisal, but I'm confident that this was the lowest cost appraisal proposal that we got through that RFP process for this. And I agree with you that it is quite expensive.
Any further discussion on ordinance number 3149-2020? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre.
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes.
Councilmember Naxted.
Yes.
Councilmember Petty.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Item D5, council, resolution number 2020-63, declaring a right-of-way for the portion of the cul-de-sac at the north end of Dobbin Spec Circle as dedicated on Barron Park 2012 edition, plat number KM 2012-89, and is set forth on the attached Exhibit A, is not needed for a public purpose and consenting to its vacation. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Naxton.
I move to adopt resolution 2020-63.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-63? Seeing none, we'll bring you back to council. Comments, deliberation from council?
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. I don't have any objection to unanimous consent, but I was just thinking, there was a lot of background information for that little bit of vacation there. And I don't think I was missing anything, and that was it, right? There's that portion of the cul-de-sac on the outside of the radius.
Yeah,
Mr. Ostrander?
thank you, Mayor Gable. And I was actually going to have a conversation with my planner that next time we have one of these, that we can cut down on the amount of background information by a significant amount. But
Yeah, I mean, there was so much information. I had to recomb through it a couple times to see if I was missing something. But I mean, it was very well done. Don't get me wrong, but yeah.
yeah, so this is simply to vacate that bulb of the cul-de-sac that previously existed. Now we've dedicated from Dobbin Spec Circle out to Marathon Road to the west there, and it just vacates that unneeded
Very
bulb
good.
of the cul-de-sac.
Well, if you have an Employee of the Month award, I would recommend that person for it. Unanimous consent was requested. Here's the objection. Councilmember Glendenning.
Just went off. I appreciate the thoroughness and in-depth analysis of the situation, because it's just not this little corner of the cul-de-sac. You look and see at all the other properties, and it refreshes our memories and understanding of why Magic Avenue is such as it is. Or we look and we see where there's an anadromous stream, and we look at some other properties, and we see, well, maybe there's something over in Track 3 that's not usable by the city. And it raises the question, what are we going to do with that? So one analysis can spawn a lot of questions and develop background for us for future considerations. But that's just me. I got thick glasses. I like to read.
Unanimous consent was requested. Councilor, is there any objection? Seeing or hearing? Well, seeing none, I guess the resolution number 2020-63 is adopted. Next, we have resolution number 2020-64, authorizing the award of a professional services agreement for the Kenai Small Business Development and Tourism Marketing Services related to the COVID-19 public health emergency. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to adopt resolution number 2020-64.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2020-64? Seeing and hearing none, I'll bring it back to council. I believe there's a recommended amendment to this. If someone care to move that, Councilmember next then. Oh, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yes, this is in the laydown. I move to amend resolution number 2020-64 with resolution number 2020-64 substitute.
Second, and request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we now have resolution number 2020. Oh, sorry, Jim.
Never mind. Could someone speak to background on this, how this ties in to the CARES Act and how it complements?
We're moving this is just to move the substitute. Did you have an objection to? Okay.
No objection. I just, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll come. Well, I'll circle back to you, Councilmember Glendenning here as soon as this unanimous consent was rejected or requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah. Could somebody from the administration speak to on background as how this proposal ties into programs that the city currently has, or maybe it's a bolt-on to a situation that the CARES Act addresses.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gable. Councilmember Glendenning. So I'm not sure if it was the last meeting or the meeting before, we had resolution 2020-54, which established two programs in our individual assistance portion of our CARES Act money. One of those was this one that's in front of you, which is a small business development and tourism marketing services. And that was for $50,000 that council set aside for marketing services specifically. And then there was a second one for $50,000 that's for mental health services, which I believe is the next resolution in your packet. So after we got approval from council to go forward, we put out an RFP for both mental health services and for the marketing services. This is the resolution that awards the contract to the one contractor that bid on the RFP for the marketing services. So now we will roll this out pursuant to the guidance that was approved in 2020-54, where businesses that are located in the city of Kenai can get up to $1,000 of free marketing services from Divining Point to promote their business. That is intended to support them as they look to recover from impacts from COVID-19.
Thank you for going on the record with your review. It's welcome.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my recollection that Divining Point is the marketer for the city that's helped us with our own program. So I'm happy to see that they're, going to be helping businesses in Kenai too. So I'm glad to see their focus on City of Kenai. Thank you.
Councilmember Naxton.
Just kind of curious, since I didn't see the RFP, how do you manage it by the hour as opposed to a lump sum or something along those lines? How's the contract going to work?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gable, Councilmember Naxton. So we're putting together the application process now, but there actually will be an application process that administration will have to go through before we send them to Divining Point. So someone who's interested in taking advantage of these marketing services would submit an application to the city. We would review that, make sure that they actually are eligible for the program. Then we would connect them with Divining Point. At that point, Divining Point would provide them with 12 hours of their services. That's where the $80 an hour comes in, so that they actually get 12 hours of marketing services from Divining Point if they qualify through the application process that the city puts in place.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrander. Any other comments, questions from council? Seeing none, we have resolution number 2020-64 substitute. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxted?
Yes.
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yes.
And Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up, we're on D7, resolution number 2020-65, authorizing the award of a professional services agreement for mental health services related to the COVID-19 public health emergency brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember Naxton.
I move to adopt resolution 2020-65.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2020-65? Oh, sorry. Seeing none, Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I'd like to request that the council postpone this resolution indefinitely. That would give the administration an opportunity to look for another way to procure these services. We did not receive any proposals when we went out, so we'd like to see if there's an alternative way that we can get these, get a firm on board to provide these services to the residents. So we'd ask that you postpone indefinitely.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrander. Councilmember Naxton.
I move to postpone resolution 2020-65 indefinitely.
Second.
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent is requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-65 is postponed indefinitely. Item D8, resolution number 2020-66, awarding a purchase agreement for the supply and delivery of chemicals for the water and wastewater treatment plants. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Councilmember or Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to adopt resolution number 2020-66.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to the council regarding resolution number 2020-66? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Navarre.
I guess I can move the amendment. I didn't know my button was still on.
Yeah. you
But
do
I
this.
would move to amend in our laydown information, there's an amendment, a memo. Essentially, the amendment is follows the first whereas after water, add, and wastewater treatment plants. In the second whereas, replace blank with one and insert Univar Solutions as the contractor and insert $64,840 as the bid. In the third whereas, replace the blank with Univar Solutions. In the fourth whereas, replace XXXXX with Univar Solutions. And section 1, replace first blank with Univar Solutions, replace second blank with Univar Solutions, replace third blank with $64,840. And I'd request unanimous consent.
Second?
Thank you. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. We have resolution number 2020-66 as amended before us. Any further discussion?
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-66 is adopted. Next, we're on item D9, resolution number 2020-67, approving a grant to the Alaska Municipal League utilizing funding from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act. And this is brought forward by Councilmember Navarre. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I'd move for the approval of resolution number 2020-67.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-67? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move, it'll move it back before the body here. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I would ask for your support on this. If you read the resolution in one of the whereas a little ways down, they did apply for the nonprofit corporate funding, but if we opened up that window for some, then it could have impacts across. That's why you see the number 18,000, whatever. I don't have it here in front of me right this second. I'm reading off the agenda, but 872. Thank you. And that number is what a formula that AML sent out so that it could treat every municipality equally across the strait. And when they did apply for the nonprofit, they could have qualified for 50,000, and it's my understanding they only applied for 25,000. But this is even lower than the 25,000, and I don't need to tell most of us here on the body that what AML has done over the last year, both in our internet sales revenues. I truly believe, without a doubt, if AML hadn't have taken the leadership, we wouldn't be receiving those funds even today. And they have been impacted by this COVID. Not only are they responding to communities and helping them out and getting them funding and making them aware of the different things, but our summer conference had to be canceled. They are doing a virtual conference. As you can imagine, on some of their conference, they raise revenues by having sponsorships and different things like that, and more participation by members of the association to attend. And all those numbers will be down, and their budget will be impacted that way also. And at the same time, they're still moving ahead on a number of fronts. So, and I also just ask for your support of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarre. Any other question or discussion on this resolution? Councilmember Naxton.
Yeah, I do appreciate AML and what they do for the city, and I'm inclined to agree with this. I do have some questions, or a question, to just make sure that we can actually do that. Everything that we have granted so far has been within our city boundaries. This doesn't run afoul in any in any way with our policy?
Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Naxted. It doesn't meet the requirements of our own grant program, which required that a nonprofit provide direct services to the residents of the city. So it didn't meet our grant program because of that. However, AML does provide direct services to the city government here, and because of that, it meets the federal guidance. So no, we're not running afoul of federal guidance. It was just that it did not meet our own grant program requirements.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes, just to echo some of Timmy's observations here, I see that what AML will do with these funds, just reading from the literature, they're going to develop a shared service program in support of CARES Act compliance reporting and grants, which will help shape and guide disbursement of these funds and perhaps recognize needs. Another one is they're going to expand the support of AMLIP and AML-JIJ as they respond to economic impact. This is going to be a tough winter, folks, and any support, any overarching support that we can get for ourselves, for the borough, and for our state will be greatly welcome. And then they're going to invest in additional crisis communications for fiscal year 21, public outreach, local government value, support all our governments in their ability to communicate, not only amongst ourselves but with their citizens. So I'll end my comments, and I'm just proud that we can do this.
Any further discussion? Yeah, I support this resolution also. I did have some follow-up, and in fact, I had the exact same question that Mr. Naxted had to administration regarding our ability to do this. And I think I got to say that Nils Andreasen has done a fantastic job as executive director of AML, and certainly, as they move forward, they have impacts that I guess if they didn't qualify for any municipal grants, they would be really shut out. So, hopefully other municipalities will step up and provide a little bit of financial support moving forward, because as Councilmember Glendenning said, things, aren't going to be as rosy here, I don't think, for a little bit yet. So this might help bridge the gap. Any other discussion? Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you, and I just want to continue too. As you heard, the federal government is working on a third stimulus, and I can tell you that AML and NELS has been involved in working with NLC and National Association of Counties too, and making sure some of the problems that came with the first two and how the money came down and how it could be utilized quickly, and that they were working with some of that language and that, so they continue to just be out there on our behalf, and in some cases asked us to respond, in some cases to our senators and congressmen to make sure that some of the concerns that we have going forward on the next stimulus also doesn't, that we can get it to our small businesses and our communities and make it work. And in some cases, hopefully open up some avenues that cities can benefit a little bit more from some of this next CARES Act funds, so that we can continue to keep our taxes down with this economic impact that's hit all communities and cities. So, yeah, I too, as you know, support this, but I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
if I might, I just want to go on the record. One of the, what Tim said is absolutely true, and AML is doing a lot of that on behalf of all the municipalities in Alaska. However, Nels did assure me that this CARES Act money would not be used for any of that effort because there's lobbying restrictions that go with it. So they're putting it in a separate account, and it's going to be used for other aspects of what AML does, and he's assured me it won't be used for any lobbying.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Request unanimous consent.
Thank you. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-67 is adopted, which brings us to item G9. Oh, I'm sorry. F1. This is our,
And there's a replacement
oh,
memo.
I'm sorry, yes, I was thinking of this as, I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Naxted. Item F1, substitute ordinance number 3133-2020, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the airport special revenue fund, authorizing a budget transfer in the airport terminal improvement capital project fund, and appropriating FY 2020 budgeted funds in the airport master plan capital project, airport snow removal equipment, and airport operations facility improvement capital project funds for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC improvements to the airport operations facility and replacement of the airport's wide area mower. This is brought forward by administration with a clerk's note at the July 15th meeting. This item was postponed to this council meeting. A motion to enact is on the floor. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move to amend substitute ordinance 3133-2020 by the request in the replacement memo. And so that would be by amending the title by deleting the words increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the airport special revenue fund and replacing XXXXXX in the third whereas with $248,150 and deleting the fourth whereas in its entirety and replace both XXXXXX's to $208,485 in section 1 and delete section 3 in its entirety and renumber the subsequent sections accordingly, and in the newly renumbered section 6 replace July 1, 2020, the effective date of the FY 2021 City of Kenai annual budget with that pursuant to KMC 115-070F, this ordinance shall take effect immediately upon enactment. And that's it.
Second and request unanimous consent. Good job.
Thank you. Thank the city manager.
Unanimous consent was requested. I just do have one question. Is this a substitute memo or a substitute ordinance that we have here? Because it says requested amendment to substitute ordinance number 3133-2020.
Yes, Mayor Gabriel, this is a substitute ordinance, which I believe was moved at the July 15th meeting and postponed to this council meeting.
Okay.
So we're just amending the.
Yeah, that's the substitute. I just want to make sure. I think I wasn't there at that meeting, so I guess I did see it as a substitute. So is there any objection to the amendment to the substitute ordinance number 3133-2020 that Vice Mayor Malloy just made? Seeing none, unanimous consent was requested. No objection. We have substitute ordinance number 3133-2020 as amended before us. Pleasure, council.
Question unanimous consent.
We need to, this is an ordinance, so we'll need to vote on this. But is there any further discussion on this substitute ordinance? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Naxted,
Yes.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre,
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning,
Yes.
Mayor Gabriel.
Yes,
Motion passes.
thank you. We're on item G9 now, I believe. Response to COVID-19. This is brought forward by the city manager. So, Mr. Oster, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Starting in the same format that I did at the last meeting where I created an update on how many cases we're seeing in the Central Peninsula, which is information that's not readily available out there when what I'm calling the Central Peninsula is just really Sterling, Nikiski, Kenai, and Soldotna. In the last 3 weeks, Kenai has seen 20 cases, Nikiski's seen 1, Soldotna's seen 28, and Sterling has seen 3 for a total number of cases of 52 in the last 3 weeks. Good news in that regard is we've only seen 1 case in the month of August. This rate is slightly lower than what we saw in the previous 2 weeks, so we're seeing about We're seeing 2.5 cases per day, which is lower than it was the 2 weeks prior, which was 2.7 cases per day. Councilmember Glendenny had asked about hospitalizations last time, so I looked into that. Over the course of the public health emergency, the Central Peninsula has seen 8 total hospitalizations, and there are no hospitalizations currently. In other good news, the case rate for the Central Peninsula, which is the number of cases per 100,000 individuals, has dropped. The 14-day period, it was at 6.5, but over the last 7 days, that's dropped to 4.9. So we're seeing improvements in the case rates over the last 7 days as well. As far as facilities in the city, nothing has changed from last time other than the ice is now in at the multipurpose facility, and they're having clinics over there at the multipurpose facility for skaters. And the last item I have as far as a COVID update, other than I will provide you an update under the city manager's report about our grant program. The State Softball Association actually contacted our Parks and Rec director, wondering if they could hold state here because they can't hold it in Anchorage because of the new mandates in Anchorage that have restricted that type of activity. They approached us, they showed us their mitigation protocols. All the participants are willing to sign a waiver, similar to what we've had for sports or youth sports attendees. So they're willing to sign the waiver as well. And it looks like the state D tournament may actually be moved down here for next weekend, which would be a nice thing to have here locally, which is typically, like I said, held in Anchorage. Other than that, I don't have any updates on COVID, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Glendenning? Glenis, I'm sorry.
Since our city facilities are going to be utilized for this wonderful opportunity for their softball event, I would highly encourage, since we offered such wonderful generosity to have them come down at this critical time, that they might consider us to come down in subsequent years because of our hospitality and sharing our facilities during this critical time.
Yeah, through the mayor, thank you for that, Councilmember Petty. That's actually a suggestion that I made to them when I talked to them. I said, you should strongly consider coming down in future years because we were able to come through for you this year. So we'll see. I didn't require anything in writing, but I suggested it strongly.
How many participants would you anticipate?
Mayor Gabriel, the estimates for the D tournament is there will be somewhere between 10 to 15 teams that would be in the tournament, but probably 4 or 5 of those would be local. So you'd have approximately 10 teams traveling down here to the peninsula.
Couple hundred people plus family.
12
and
people per team plus families.
Okay, very good. Presumably quite a bit less than we had for the dip net fishery, I'm taking. Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes, thank you for your update on the ice over at our facility. Just looking forward to the winter, that ice in that facility will be available for winter sporting events such as high school hockey and perhaps brown bears. There's no sideboards, no stops. It's going to be open with requisite mitigation efforts. Is that our plan?
Mr. Ostrander.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning, that is the plan right now. Yeah, there will be mitigation protocols in place, but the plan is to use it as normal for the winter season.
And I would add, if you've never skated before, I'm sure they probably have open skating. There's open skating sessions. That if you've never skated over there, even if you don't know how to skate or want to put on, it's pretty unique to be able to go out there in in July and August and skate, and as opposed to everything being covered in snow. I mean, you're skating around, looking out, and trees are all budded out and green. It's actually, it's totally different, but pretty kind of cool. So if you haven't done it, I would suggest Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we are advertising that on our Facebook, and is there other outreach to the public, not only our city, but maybe out in the borough, Soldotna maybe, for our facility that has ice now?
Mr. Ostrander.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Glendenning, and I guess to clarify, Mayor, I'm not sure that there is open skate currently there. I believe it's clinics only currently.
Okay.
But if there is open skate, it's something that we would make sure that we get out and advertise.
Yeah, I know in the past they've had one that's open to summer. This is a little different with COVID, but I know in the past they've had it open or sessions for open skate, which is kind of neat. Any other questions of the city manager on COVID-19 response? Seeing none, we'll move to item G10, which is a discussion item. City of Kenai response to Governor Dunleavy's local mitigation level recommendations and consideration of joint work session with the City of Soldotna Council. And just a little background or groundwork before I turn over to Mr. Ostrander. Governor Dunleavy reached out and had a teleconference with the mayors on the Kenai Peninsula. I think he had done that through different other geographical areas of the state, southeast, some of the rail belt, southwest, and sort of the theme behind it was a good discussion, and Dr. Zink was involved, so with along with some of the other leadership team responding to COVID from the governor's office. But essentially, the gist of the meeting is that the governor's made it clear that he would like to shift specific mandates, mitigation responses to COVID to the local communities, regarding what we could do as case counts rise. He's got a good point in the fact that if, personally, but I will go on to say that his reasoning behind it, which is somewhat valid, is that there's some areas of the state that may not require a full state mandate for certain things because they don't have any COVID cases, or very few cases where the rail belt or maybe some southeast communities have a higher rate, and that's what they go by as the number of cases per 100,000. So as you increase, he came up with this color-coded sort of alert level with recommendations. And I hope I'm not stealing too much of the city manager's thunder here, but during that teleconference we were told that we were going to be getting this, and shortly after, and we never did. This was something that was put out, I think, on KTU or something, but I think it's essentially what he was alluding to as far as their recommendations going from the state and the Health and Social Services Department regarding, mitigation efforts as cases either ramp up or ramp down. So at that point, Mr. Ostrander and I had talked. One of the concerns I had is that, we're 11 miles from the city of Soldotna, so if you're talking about a pandemic response, there's got to be some consistency and uniformity within local geographical areas, I believe, to be effective. And being so close to them, I thought it might be worth the discussion about maybe scheduling something with them to see about moving forward, together, or doing things together. There might be some fallbacks, but we can get into that discussion. I'll have Mr. Ostrander give any further background or information on that before we dive into the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I don't have a whole lot more to add, other than when the mayor and I were talking about the possibility of a work session with Soldotna, I reached out to Stephanie Queen, the Soldotna city manager, and we had talked about if this work session were to occur, we'd want to make sure that we had some good options for the councils to discuss at that work session. But those were all dependent on getting this mitigation recommendations from the governor's office, and like the mayor said, we didn't receive it. This that I printed out and provided tonight was something that was actually grabbed. It was a screen grab from the governor's press conference last week. So we have not seen the actual mitigation recommendations that we had anticipated to get. So without those, it would be difficult for us to put together anything concrete for the councils to discuss. So at this point, and added to that, I think, with my previous report, and it does seem like case numbers are holding or even potentially improving a little bit. The urgency that we felt 2 weeks ago is not there as much as it was then. I mean, this thing changes every week, it seems, but without that, without the specific recommendation from the governor, without the ability to really put together something concrete for the councils to discuss, it probably makes sense to push off any sort of work session with the city council till later. I will tell you that the Soldotna City Council is very interested and receptive to the idea of having a joint work session if the time comes.
Yeah, and just to speak to that, at the time of the teleconference, that's when the cases were spiking, into the hundreds across the state. Well, now we're down into as far as resident cases go, into the 50, 60 range, so things have throttled back. But, my point is that it's probably not a bad idea for our council to think about a foundation moving forward if there were to be mitigation levels more restrictive than what we have now. And whether, these are recommendations, at least from what I've seen, recommendations from the governor's office regarding, what we should do at those certain levels. And apparently they would be the ones that would be coding the levels, so I think their thought was that their health, Department of Health would go to level red, and then everybody would say, okay, now we're gonna, go to these mitigation. I see it as being a little bit problematic in that I've heard from business people that are not super receptive to sort of being ramped up and down and the uncertainty that goes with that. If we go to red, in my mind, you don't come out of red for at least a little while because of the nature of at least for 2 weeks, because of the nature of the virus and the lag time and of when people are infected and when they become or test positive. So, they can be problematic, but the point I'm trying to make is where I would like to see it doesn't do us any good, I don't think, to come up with a plan without at least having a discussion with our sister city. That could be problematic working together too. And I'm just, to be honest, using the example that we've been meeting in person for several months now, and they're still meeting by Zoom. So, how that would play out, as far as mandates go, it's hard to say, but, I don't think we want to be bound by unilaterally, but at least have the discussion and get the feeling from the council on whether we've already granted or vested a lot of emergency powers with Paul and give them the authority to have the discussion with Stephanie and come back, or the Soldotna city manager, and come back as far as I would like to know if they're planning on putting in mandates at certain time and have a heads up on it. Much like they would probably like to know what we plan on doing. So anyway, with that, I'll just open it up, see if you guys have any thoughts of where this might go. And Councilmember Navarre.
Yeah. I like the idea of working with the city of Soldotna, and I guess how I'd certainly comment on it is one way to deal with whether to raise it to a red, whether to say it's this, is to convene, even if it's in a Zoom meeting, a joint session of Soldotna and Kenai, come to a consensus, and the city managers then move on that directive. Because if I heard you correctly at the beginning, it doesn't do our communities any good if one's doing one thing and the other's doing the other. A matter of fact, we might go as far, if it's possible, to kind of include the borough, only that it's the peninsula. And when you talk about K Beach, which isn't that far, it ties Ridgeway, it ties Kenai and Soldotna together. I think in some cases having that discussion where everybody, between the bodies, they say, yeah, let's raise it, and there's directive, and we're consistent in our community. If we can't come to a consensus, then we probably should stay at orange instead of go to red. But at least we're given clear directive to the public, and I think on the Kenai Peninsula, and I think that's important. So I guess I'd broaden it, if it's possible, a little bit more to see if the borough would engage themselves in that kind of a emergency joint meeting, if that's what it takes, if in fact we get some real different numbers, and we have to react, because I think a unified front is the way to go. But I'll leave it at that. But I'm for even just meeting with the city of Soldotna if that's the case. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to respond to a couple of your points, Councilmember Navarre, that was brought up prior by the borough because they're a second-class borough and they don't have police powers. And I think the governor's office is working on, ways that they would be able to, they could vest authority with the borough to during, under the disaster. And I'm not sure what, I think it was Title 16 of the statutes that address disasters and the authorities that go along with those. So, they're sort of working through that. I guess my point is we all share one hospital. We don't have our own hospital in Kenai. We all share, at least in the Central Peninsula, that hospital. So that's the whole idea. And I agree with that's, the reason for the discussion. Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I thought going back into the late winter that the whole idea of all the mitigation efforts and all the concerns we had and all the discussion was to flatten the curve so we didn't overwhelm that hospital. We most certainly have done that. Now we have imposed upon us a rainbow that we don't know the origin of it, we don't know how it's going to be administered, we don't know how it's going to be triggered, and granted, in time we will know. But I think this discussion might be just a little premature. I can project that Soldotna has a totally different outlook on things than we do. They're the ones that put out a public record apologizing for police brutality when none exists. For example, I think we should just take a deep breath and see what evolves and see if this governor is going to provide leadership and see if these color codes that are here are going to be imposed from him or if we have a local triggering mechanism. I think we're way premature in this conversation. I think as of right now we're in a good place. I think we are observing our numbers, our statistics, our health very well, and I for one wish Soldotna well and all our other surrounding communities. But just to go and have a Zoom meeting with them, I'm quite frankly, I'm done with Zoom meetings. But I'm just one of 7, so thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Petty.
With this local mitigation level, it appears to me from what I'm looking at that we're under a hot emergency and that there's great panic here when city manager just told us that our numbers are way down and we have nobody in the hospital from this event. And I don't see a green, like we're good to go. And till something more urgent occurs, I would like to not overreact at all and have a sense of calm and serenity instead of propagating fear in amongst our community. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Councilmember next then.
Maybe would be the purpose for the meeting, but the graph doesn't mean anything. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you either, Jim. You were talking very softly over there.
I'll correct that.
Okay. The graph doesn't, I guess bluntly, it doesn't mean much to me. I mean, there's different colors, but what the colors mean is not defined. So, I think at some point, maybe the city managers for the local area could come up with what yellow means or what orange might mean, and then suggest that back to us. I mean, that would be a starting point if we were going to have conversations about it. But Unless it's defined somewhere by the state already, and that's what we're gonna have to do. I don't know what moderate means. Is that one person in 10? Is that one person in 100? The rest of it, you can read, and then, and then I guess all we could be is more restrictive, but I don't know what the color means.
Mr. Ostrander?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gary-Bo. Councilmember Naxted. I do think that those levels have been established. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but they're based on the case rates, which is the cases per 100,000. And high would be, if you have case rate in excess of, I think, 10 per 100,000 per day, that is. So those have been established, but really what we are waiting for is specific recommendations from our state's health professionals in a package that says, okay, if you're a municipality and you have case rates at this level, this is what you should consider doing. Once we have that package together and its direction from those professionals, then I think that's when a conversation is warranted, where we should look at those and decide whether or not we want to, at a local level, to follow those recommendations, or if we choose not to. But until you have that package, which the governor has indicated is coming, we just have not seen it yet. Until you have that, I think it's really difficult. Like you say, based on what I've given you tonight, it's impossible to make any sort of decision. But if you have that package that includes everything that you need as a local municipality to look at and determine whether or not it's recommendations that you want to follow, then it warrants a discussion.
I'm just thinking that, if that's been defined and it's not defined here, let's just say it is, and then we're in a yellow, and we don't follow that, I think there's a certain amount of liability. We don't have a Dr. Zink here telling us, or a different one, telling us that it doesn't apply. So as cities, we'd have to be more restrictive rather than less restrictive if we're following this, I would think.
Well, the way I understand it, these wouldn't be mandates, they would be guidelines put forth by the state that they recommend. If you go into red, then this is what you guys would put in as mitigation, and yellow and orange and purple, I guess. And then as Paul said, there's more information coming. We don't have it. We could have waited till the next meeting. I think the idea was to sort of get a idea of the temperature of this body as far as, working with the city of Soldotna on things that, if that comes to that. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you. I would support having a dialogue through the city manager and then a work session when we do have a package and we do have something to look at and just discuss that's more than this. I think we would benefit from the discussion. So would the public. It wouldn't necessarily have to be, like a fear type of thing, but it would be better than, going through a process like that, whether we go, yes, we are going to go with some of these recommendations, or no, or we're going to modify them. I think it would be beneficial to the residents and the businesses if, we work with the city of Soldotna, or at least see whether what's, where they're at. And I agree that the borough would need to be part of it, at least at some point, because of K Beach and Nikiski and everything. And, they do have the Central Peninsula Hospital Service Area, which has healthcare powers, although they don't have police powers, but that would be that's a geographic area that includes all of us. Part of it is of course it's political, and then there's common sense, and whatever you mandate, you can't mandate common sense. But that being said, I think that we would benefit, and so would our residents, from having a dialogue at the appropriate time once we do have that package of information. Thank you.
Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I guess I was reading between the lines on this discussion, and I'm like a lot of everybody else, and as you heard in my earlier comments, I said, you know, if we can't come to a consensus, then you stay at orange or you stay at yellow, you don't move up to red. It's better than giving the public a misinformation. I don't know if some of you, if you've seen the Clarion, somehow or other they have a code for the different areas of the borough, and they're utilizing that code to kind of let the public know whether your area is yellow, red, or orange. But I think not only our country, but our community has a lot to learn, and our state has a lot to learn from this Penn health emergency. And there will be another one. I mean, the history tells you there will be. So if we can come up, I look at it as us working together. And like you said, even working with the community, they might say, hey, we should only have to go down to 50% instead of 75% in the bars or whatever. And that discussion can be had along with health professionals and why and how that can be done in a different setting. But that's why I'm saying have the discussion with Soldotna, have the discussion with the borough, so that it might be today on this local mitigation level and just starting that, but it might be setting in place a process for how we do. I think this country would have been better off, and I'm not trying to be the Monday morning quarterback, but essentially if we had, instead of shut everything down, gone to 50%, gone to 25%, and then, you know, to where our businesses weren't totally shut down. Again, I don't know, you know, at the beginning of this health emergency across our country, it was no mask, and now it's mask all the time. We're going to learn a lot from this, and I hope that us as the Kenai Peninsula Borough takes a lead on figuring out how we're going to respond to not only the potential of another health emergency, but maybe other emergencies by us working within our different jurisdictions and finding real answers. So that's why I'm also, you know, you have to start the dialogue someplace, and I'm not looking at it as a political avenue, as more of give the public some assurances that their government is working and they have a plan for how they're going to respond and how they're going to communicate to the public on whatever disaster it happens to be. So I'll end it there. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that was the purpose of this. I mean, this is a clearly fluid and dynamic situation. There's, you know, our case counts could, you know, you look at infection rates on ships, you know, on where you got, you know, a large, you know, majority of the crew and passengers, all of a sudden one person has it and the whole crew has it. It's obviously, you know, very contagious. The point is, I'm not trying to press a panic button here with anybody. I think that they're just, as you said, a time to start a dialogue of saying, you know, instead of being in a situation where people are saying, hey, what are you guys doing about this, you know? My grandma went to the hospital and she was being really careful, or, you know, now we don't have any ventilators, or, you know, things like that. I'm a data-driven guy, but I'd like to, in these cases, at least be prepared to, as a government body, to respond to something that's going to could potentially severely negatively affect our community. You know, and hopefully everybody's being socially responsible, practicing good hygiene, doing all the things that are recommended to stymie this. Kenai's actually not doing too, when you look at the numbers for population, you know, knock on wood, you know, we're not doing too bad. We're all kind of in the same, you know, numbers wise, but, you know, it'd be nice, like I said, to have a plan in place where we're not left reacting. We can be a little proactive. So at any rate, Councilman Glendenning.
Yeah, just an observation was mentioned that in the Clarion there was a color code for various conditions. I believe that has to do with the school district, and that's actually by area. Homer can have a different color code than we can in Seward, and so that adds to the difficulty of our discussions. You know, if you have the same colors and you're trying to indicate concern in geographical areas, we probably need to simplify it. And I don't think going to a health caste system is necessarily a way to do it. Again, I say we're going to flatten the curve. We've done that. Obviously, what we are doing in a community, borough-wide, citywide, outside of the cities, is being successful. And I think we keep a weather eye on it and hold our course and not try and change what is already successful. I think society will tolerate a certain amount of this virus as long as we can have community, economic, and family stability honored. And we are doing that. Thank you.
Councilmember Navarre.
Real quick, I also just wanted to, and I don't know if Paul has anything, to caution us too. Some of this request from the state, we have to make sure we want to take on those, and that's not alleviating them of some of their financial or other responsibility, which then is like an unfunded mandate. I know AML had some discussions and concerns, whether it's specifically on this or others, but that will also be part of the discussion as all of this give and take comes down, that we'll have to keep at the forefront, you know, as what we take on and what we don't do, and through these different requests from the governor. So I just want to, but I believe working together. I think our state, all in all, has done fairly well, and our communities in handling this. You know, if you look at some parts of the country. So, but you also see the singling out and businesses screaming out, especially in our largest city. And how the fairness and how that, and that's why I said working with some kind of plan, and then everybody gets treated the same way, or they get to have input in it and say, why are we like this, and restaurants are like this, and yet Walmart gets to stay open. You got to have that discussion so people understand why certain things fall within, whether they're essential businesses, and you have that argument, but it's for, you know, it's for later, but we want to have that discussion so not only our community and our business community understands how we're going to make a decision or how the state makes it. It would take a lot of that away. And like you said, even in being in business, if you knew we got hotter and what would our business look like if it moved to red, it gives us some planning tools to be ready for that if in cases in this particular case were rising, and you knew it at some point, whether it's this week or next week, that your business or your operation was going to go into the red, and what does that entail? Right now, a lot of times it's whoever makes whatever decision. That's, you know, in different communities, and I think across the state, and that it should be somewhat the same of what red moves, when you move, whether it's our own decision that when we move to red, but then our community and our business community knows what that means. So, like I said, it's not going to hurt anything to have the discussion, and I would hope the public and the business community is engaged in it. Thanks.
Well, you know, I guess, you know, as I'm thinking through this, you know, the governor has said that he would prefer not to do a statewide mandate, which means that we are going to have to respond. It was easy. The first round was a lot easier for us. I would say easier. I'm not saying that anything here is easier, but it sort of, you know, relieved the decision making that we maybe would have had to make. But the state came out with their mandates, and we couldn't do anything less restrictive than those. Well, at this point, they're saying we're not going to do that. We want to defer to the local government authorities. So, I mean, we could actually, and I don't know if Paul would be receptive to this or get maybe some feeling from him as far as, you know, have Paul, we've vested a lot of emergency powers in Paul moving forward is maybe have him and staff think about, coming up with a draft of what a mitigation ramp up or down would look like in the city of Kenai and bring that forward. If we do go to that, I don't want to see a situation where we're going to be having an emergency meeting, if it came to that, with everybody's hair on fire, wondering where we're going, what direction we're going to go in. Paul, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Because we don't have the health professionals on staff, I'd be hesitant to try to come up with mitigation levels that weren't at least based on something that had been provided from the state, which is why I'm hopeful that the information that Governor Dunleavy said he was going to provide will still be forthcoming. Now, once we receive that, then certainly I'd be willing to look at it and come with a recommendation, which I think is what Stephanie and I had kind of envisioned with this work plan, is we would look at what the governor provided, maybe look to modify it slightly based on our local areas and what we thought was better suited for our area, and then come to the council. And I'd be willing to do the same thing just for the city, but I really would like to get at least a framework provided by the health professionals or Department of Health and Social Services at the state level before putting that together.
Well, how does this sound? How if we asked the clerk to put the same discussion item on our next agenda, and if you would reach out to the governor's office, Mr. Ostrander, and maybe have a follow-up discussion scheduled for next meeting with a little more information? Does that sound, Vice Mayor Maloney?
Yeah, I have no objection to that, and I might also suggest that the two city managers might talk to the hospital administration too, because they might have some input into things, also from the healthcare provider point of view.
Sure. So duly noted, Ms.
Yes, it will be on the
plan?
next agenda.
Very good, thank you. Okay, with that, any further
Just one
discussion?
question.
Oh,
What-
Councilmember Glendinning.
Yeah, what depth of information are we going to require? Just a variation on the theme of the caste system? Or are we going to require specific recommendations and discussion items before we launch forward into another round of discussion like we had tonight? What is our standard of information from the governor before we put it on the agenda? Do we have that clarified?
As I said before, the governor's office during our conference call had mentioned something similar to this. We don't know if this is what he was recommending, but a color code with recommended mitigating strategies according to what you're ramped up with. This is what we got. We didn't get the other information. The point is to get the information that the governor's office would recommend under certain color coding, and have the discussion based on that information at our next meeting.
Okay, and we're agreeing that a color code then is appropriate?
No, we're not at all. We're just seeing what they're recommending.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're just gonna have another discussion with better information. Okay. Is there any further discussion? Okay, with that, we'll move to commission committee reports. Council on Aging.
Meeting for August is canceled, and September I can't really forecast. I don't have my calendar in front of me. Could you, clerk, could you tell me the date, please?
The September meeting would be the 10th if they hold it.
Okay, the next potential meeting is the 10th. Thank you, of September.
Thank you. Airport Commission.
Next meeting is August 14th.
Thank you. Harbor Commission. That would be Councilmember Peterkin. He's not here this evening.
I can just let you know that the next meeting is next Monday, the 10th.
Very good, thank you. Parks and Recreation Commission.
The next meeting is tomorrow at 6 p.m. here, and I'm not sure if it's a Zoom or here and Zoom, or or what? And maybe the deputy clerk has information on that.
That is the one committee that has not voted yet, and I haven't got responses back from everybody, but I'm gonna guess it's gonna be hybrid. I mean, that's what we're offering, unless they all decide they wanna do Zoom.
So you'll let me know what the outcome of that is, so I'll know how to liaison. Thank you.
I'll be sure to send an email out tomorrow to everybody so they're all on the same page.
Planning and Zoning Commission?
Thank you. Planning and Zoning met on July 22nd. They had one item. It was consideration of a plat. It was at the corner of Silver Salmon and Chinook Drive. Basically, it was two lots combining into one. So it was a pretty straightforward recommendation, and they approved that for recommendation. Their next meeting is on August 12th.
Thank you. Beautification Committee?
The next meeting won't be until September the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mini Grant Steering Committee, there is no report. On the report of the mayor, first of all, I'd just like to thank Vice Mayor Malloy for filling in for me last meeting rather. And as we're 3 hours into this meeting, that meeting was 1 hour, and this seemed everybody's pretty happy, so that might be, you guys will fire me, I guess. Things will move along quicker. So thanks again for that. As we had said, I had a teleconference along with the city manager with the governor's office. I think we pretty much covered that under COVID. Again, I just wanted to mention everybody to have to keep the recommended practices for mitigation. I think that's definitely helping the spread. And the other thing is that the seafood industry, I'd like to do a shout out to our local seafood processors here that have seem to have done a very good job to date with, getting, our fish processed and reducing the number of cases here. There are very few for the amount of fish or for the amount of workers that we have and the interaction and bring them from out of state. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was, last Friday was kind of a kick in the gut there with, as the news started unfolding. Obviously, when you hear of a plane crash, especially involving two planes in midair, that there's probably going to be somebody that on at least one of the planes. And in this case, I knew both pilots, and just wanted to again send my sympathies and condolences out to the Helen and the Knopf family, and it must be just a terrible time that she's going through. And Helen is just one of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet, and hopefully they'll have enough support, community support to get through this time. Gary was, I want to say something about Gary. Gary always, there was no doubt, whether you agreed with him or not, the thing I admire most about Gary was that he did what he thought was right for his constituents. And sometimes that's hard to do, when there's other pressures involved, and a lot of times the general public doesn't know about nuances that are going on behind the scenes, much the same way that we have up here when we make decisions. I mean, we're transparent, certainly, but everybody has everything we deliberate. People see a little bit differently at times. And certainly, I've always said this about people on this body that politically a lot of times I don't agree with. They've, through insightful conversation, being prepared, have changed my mind on certain things, on legislation that we're considering. And so that's what government's about. That's how you arrive at what you think is the best possible solution for your constituent. And Gary believed that down to his core. And I think when you saw what happened in the legislature, he wasn't doing it for his own self-interest. He was doing it for what he thought was the best interests of the constituents under extreme amount of pressure. And, you know, at some level, you certainly admire people for that, and I do. And I actually, the last time Paul and I were in Juneau, we didn't go down this past spring, but the spring before. You know, Gary was a personal friend of mine. I've known him for quite a while, and you know, things that you could talk about with him beyond just politics. You know, I remember before we really knew him that well, Lisa, my wife, was driving one of our trucks through the K Beach Bridge access intersection, and it conked out on her, and the first person that helped her was Gary, you know, which she didn't know him at the time, but you know, he stopped and pulled her through the intersection, and that was just the type of guy he was. He was a true Alaskan. When Paul and I were in Juneau, we had one evening where Paul was having dinner with a friend of his down there, and I had kind of an open evening, and as I was walking out the Capitol, Gary was there walking out with Bryce Edgman, and he didn't bat an eye. He's like, "What are you doing? Let's go." And there was like no for an answer. We're going to go, you know, we're going to have a beer, and then we're going to go have dinner, and we're going to talk about things besides politics. And those are the types of things that I really appreciate with Gary. With Greg Bell, who was the other pilot, I want to express the same sympathies to his family. I've known Greg was a couple years behind Henry and I in school, and as Henry can attest to, Greg I think he got his pilot's license when he was close to 16, about as early as you can get it. His parents his dad had hired High Adventure Air, and his dad had passed away from cancer when I believe it was from cancer when Greg was fairly young. But his love of flying, I actually flew with him when he was probably 17, 18, just had his license, and you know, we played hockey together. Just a great guy. I always remember him with a smile on his face, and every time he'd see you, he said the same, you know, "What's the deal?" That's all he wanted. What's the deal? Just his opening line, and just a great family. And I think most people, you know, if they haven't flown with him, if they didn't know him, knew of him, and just a sad day all around. So just a few things I wanted to say about what happened last Friday. And I'm not sure when the service for Mr. Knopp will be, but maybe if we get that out on our website, or at least blast out to council once we get word of that, that would be appreciated. Saturday at noon? Soldana. Okay, I didn't check. Soldana, okay. And with that, I'll end my mayor's report and go to the city manager, Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. So the city's going to actually be having our annual auction starting some point over the next several weeks. So you'll see that. It's going to be online again this year. Works really well the last couple of years, so we'll be having that real soon. CARES Act grant program update. So the first time we rolled out the grant program, $1.905 million was distributed to nonprofits and businesses in the city. Council extended that for an additional week, and during that additional week, another $322,000 went out. In that, there was also the smaller business group where we extended to those businesses that have between $25,000 and $50,000 of gross revenues in the year, and we distributed to 12 of those businesses at $1,000 each, so that was $12,000 of that. We've also been going through the Fisher grants, commercial Fisher grants, and we've distributed 13 of those at $1,000 a piece. So where we stand right now, it looks like, assuming that the $2.67 million is going to be coming from the borough, we're going to have about $4.2 million left of available CARES out funded programs. So $785,000 of that is from the $3 million that was established for the business grants. We also have $750,000 set aside for assistance to individuals. And then with the $2.675 million from the borough, again, is $4.2 million. Administration is going to be working on recommendations to council on the best way to utilize that additional money that we'll be getting from the borough, and you'll see that rolling out here over the next month or so. Have an update on the bowling alley. The owner of the bowling alley actually had a contractor look at the building today. Hopefully we'll have a plan from them on what action they're going to take to fix the facade of the building over the next several days. Update on the bridge access pathway. As you'll recall, at the last meeting, actually the first meeting in July, Council passed Ordinance 3137, which appropriated $216,000 towards that project. I still have not received the grant agreement from the state yet. I'm supposed to be getting that any day. However, the DOT updated their estimate for the project. At the July 1st, when council passed the ordinance, the estimate for the project was $2.4 million. That's now increased to $3.3 million, increasing our local match from $216,560 to $294,947. I have the estimate here in front of me. Without going into great detail, there's a significant amount of contingency in here. I did calculate that if you were to build the Unity Trail based on this per lineal foot price, it would be more than $80 million to build the Unity Trail. So my point is that this is extraordinarily expensive for what we're getting. This will require another ordinance from council to appropriate the additional $80,000 or so. Unless council tells me differently tonight, I'll bring that forward at the next meeting for introduction. A land management plan review of the draft is complete. We completed that last week. We're going to be working on the presentation and bringing that forward for a number of work sessions with the commissions and with the council. We'll be working through that here in the coming months. Bluff project update is actually good news. I told council last time that the PET agreement, which is really the ultimate goal, that's the design agreement that we want to get passed, or that we want to get executed, wasn't scheduled until November 16th. In several discussions with the Corps over the last several weeks, they've moved that up. They think that there will be a document for me to sign as early as August 17th, which would mean total execution of the PET agreement by the first week of September. If there's a chance that it could require headquarter review. They don't think it will, but if it does require headquarter review, that moves us back to the November 16th date. But if we don't have to go to headquarters, we can get a signed PET agreement, which is a huge milestone for us, by early September, which will allow the entire design of the project to be done under the PET agreement. The 221 MOU that council approved several meetings ago is only needed to be used if you can't get into a PET agreement. So if they determine that I have to go to headquarters and move back to November 16th, we will start some work under the 221. If we can get the PET agreement in place September, early September, we would just put the entire design under that PET agreement itself. So we should know by our next meeting if we're going to meet that timeline. One last thing, signage for Old Town. We've been working on that actually over the last couple of weeks. We've been making good progress. The sign out by the highway should be up any time now, but we are working on all the signage in Old Town. It's actually taken quite a bit of coordination to figure out exactly where that should be placed and to move people through there well, but we're getting close. Divining Point is working on the design of the signs, so our objective is to get those signs in place sometime in September. So hopefully we can meet that timeline. That's the end of my report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'd just like to thank you for the update on the airport and the PU fishery revenues. It was very informational. Councilmember Petty.
Mr. Ostrander, do you have any indication why this bike opportunity is becoming so outrageously overpriced?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Petty. I have I think I could answer that, I guess. there is significant contingency in here, like I said, that is likely not to be spent. So if I were to guess, I'd say this project is going to come in below what they have estimated here. That's the first thing. I will tell you that the total design costs associated with this is, including contingency, is close to 25% of the total project cost, which industry standard is significantly higher than what you would typically find. You would want your design cost to be somewhere between 8 to 10% of a cost. DOT is telling me because of the federal requirements, that drives costs for them. That could be a component of this. There is also significant costs. $225,000 of this is just for DOT to review the plans and provide their administrative support, which is significant administrative costs associated with the project. Beyond that, the specifics, breaking down the estimate itself as far as, the amount of borrow and the costs they've got in here, the unclassified excavation. I haven't looked at it at that level to tell you whether or not those are reasonable numbers. It's certainly significantly higher than what we thought this was going to be when we first started this project. And the fact that it went up by $850,000 since 2 meetings ago is concerning to me as well.
Councilmember Naxton.
Continuing on with that, it just keeps ramping up and changing, and I think it requires a different tactic at this time from the city, as opposed to let's just add another $80,000 and then we're going to do it again or whatever. I think that I would be not in support of adding more money at this time. I think that was something you were asking that we might do for the next meeting, but I think that the state wants to continue managing it because they don't think that we know how to do that, and I think that's incorrect, and I think that it's time for perhaps the city to step up the argument with the state at whatever level that takes. And maybe it has to go to somebody with the federal government too, where the money comes from, federal highways. I don't know what that is, but I just cannot keep going down this path, personally. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Councilmember Glendening.
Yes, I agree with Henry too. It's just a ball of confusion right now. Just a question outside the box. Would we be able to buy that right of way from the state so it was our property and then we could go ahead and build a nice little bike trail? Would that be cheaper actually?
Mr. Ostrander.
Hey, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendening, I'm confident that the state would not want to transfer the right-of-way to the city, and regardless of that, the real reason they're saying that we cannot manage this project is because it's federal dollars. And the agreement between federal highways and the state right now does not allow for local control. That agreement can be changed. There's a provision within that would allow local control. The state of Alaska's DOT has chosen not to incorporate that into the agreement. That would be the likely approach if we were to pursue this, is to try to get that agreement updated so that local control of these types of projects would be allowed.
Okay, that speaks to Henry's comments then. Thank you.
Yeah, I too, unfortunately, agree that at some point the cost, I certainly don't want to leave that strip out of the loop. And I don't think that's the council's intent on that. But at some point, I think we have to lay the facts out to the governor and to our congressional delegation and to that and say, we want to take on this project and we'll do it a lot less than the 3 point whatever million that it's at now. And just like you raised some of the issues, the Unity Trail would cost this much, and just say, it's got to stop. And maybe even, copy the governor, copy whoever you have to, or send the letter to the governor, and demand that the citizens of Kenai get to manage this project, and that DOT shouldn't. And at the least, because I know it's happened in the past, they've been able to transfer these state dollars for those federal dollars and now build this project out of state dollars. And maybe there's an avenue there that they can do. I don't know if this one meets that requirement, but I know they've juggled federal dollars around and said, okay, we'll take these and put it over here in this project, and we'll take this money and put it over here because we're going to do that under a federal project anyway. I don't know if that question's been answered, but I too, I'm not voting against not moving forward with building the last loop or stretch to make the loop, but by gosh, I have to agree with Henry. We need to start a new strategy and demand that our voice be heard on this than to just pay the bill. Thanks.
Any further questions of the city manager? Councilmember Glendinning?
Just two things. One is a housekeeping and perhaps point of information. I see in our bills, we spend like $45,000 with the borough for sludge handling. That's actually a reduction in cost, is it not? We've been able to find some savings. Do I have that correct?
Mr. Ostrander?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Glendinning, we've been able to manage our sludge much better so that we don't have to haul it as much, although the prices at the borough landfill have increased for sludge disposal. So I actually believe, and I don't have it in front of me, but I actually believe the budgeted amount for this year is slightly more than it was the previous year.
Okay, thank you. And then just one more thing. I see in the paper a call, last-minute call for the census, and it says, inaction is not an option. Complete the census to shape the next 10 years for your community. I know before the COVID hit, we were going to perhaps provide an opportunity within our library and maybe a dedicated computer, or at least a place where someone could go and do the census. Is that in play now that we've opened up? Or is that something that we can still accomplish? I believe census is going to run to October, and I understand, listening to the radio, that there's going to be another outreach for census information sometime in mid-August. So I think we'd be just in time if we would just have a little terminal set aside for folks to avail themselves of it. I know it's, and speaking to the choir, singing to the choir, but it's a definite advantage to our city to have everyone enrolled within our community, just because. Thank you.
Through the mayor, Councilmember Glendinning, we do have computers set up and available for the public at the library now. There isn't a dedicated one for census, but we do have multiple computers available. If folks want to come to the library, they can fill out their census information there.
Would a little, just a little sign of invitation at the doorway saying this is available? Would that help?
We may even have something in the library, but I'll check, and we can certainly add something, fill out your census here or something like that. Might get a couple folks.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Any further questions of the city manager? Councilmember Navarre?
Yes, thank you. Paul, when you do come back to us with recommendations for some of the other COVID funds and what you're doing, I don't know if there's been any discussion, but small businesses, just like what we did with some of the one resolution tonight, and we tabled the one because we didn't get a response on the healthcare. But I would like to see if we can give some, I know the borough might be, but some additional funds to EDD and maybe the Small Business Administration. I don't know if they're getting adequate funds from some of this COVID. If they're not, I would like our city to participate. We do participate in EDD, and that there's a lot of businesses that are going to need some of that assistance, and I know it's part of their responsibility, but they might need to ramp up a little bit over the next 12 to 18 months to help us recover. And at least look into that if you can, and see what we can do there, or if we should be doing something.
Trenner?
If I could speak to that, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Navarro, I did talk to Tim Dillon specifically, and he said that do not give them any COVID money. So that was an easy one. I have not reached out to SBDC, but we certainly can. One of the things that we have talked about internally here as far as additional use of the CARES Act funding, particularly the money that's coming from the borough, is a different grant program that would require significantly more information from the applicant, and it would be intended to provide larger grants for local businesses that were severely impacted by COVID. Businesses that their revenues are down greater than 50%, and they project that they will be down for an extended period of time. So providing an opportunity for larger grants, requiring a lot more information from them, a lot more reporting from them, but a different grant program that would allow us to support some of these businesses that may, in fact, not last if this public health emergency extends beyond where it is now. So that is one of the things we were looking at as a component of this. And I just wanted to close the loop a little bit on the bike path. I mean, I would welcome the opportunity to work on this over the course of the next 6 to 8 months, if that's what council would like me to do. I would absolutely welcome that opportunity. If I'm getting direction, I'm getting the sense from council that bringing an ordinance forward at the next meeting is probably not necessary, and I should just start working on trying to figure out a way to make this happen. What I can tell you in the first step with this will be to make sure that we retain that grant funds for future use. In other words, don't allow that grant funds to go away. And I've had discussions with DOT. We can essentially park it for later use, and that will allow administration some time to work on it over the course of the next winter.
Yeah, because I think we'd all like to both figuratively and literally close the loop on that bike path. So, yeah, that would be nice. Any further questions of the city manager? Seeing none, we'll move to City Attorney, Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. I have no report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of the city attorney? Seeing none, we'll move to city clerk, deputy clerk, Ms. LaPlante.
The only thing that I have to report is that the absentee voting is going on right now through the 18th. So if you're not going to be here on election day, feel free to come in. But other than that, I do not have anything. Jamie, do you have anything?
Ms.
Yeah,
Hines?
the vote by has been referred to the voters and will be on the October 6th ballot. And the candidate filing period for council seats is currently open, and it closes on August 17th at 5 p.m. And then the last thing was, if you read for the non-objection for the liquor licenses, we've converted all of the review process from a manual hand around a piece of paper process to our Laserfish. And so where you see that it gets approved by the different departments, that is our Laserfish forms at work. And that is all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. I certainly hope you're enjoying yourself. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Ms. Hines, I was just wondering if you have adequate coverage for volunteers or staff for in-person voting for the primary at precincts, for those who aren't going to be voting by mail, or what's the situation for that?
Ms. Hines?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Malloy. The state of the primary, so I don't know what they have for staffing. I know that they have 2 people here working for the absent person, how big it's been. And I did receive an email today that they have I can't think of the term. Guardsmen, National Guardsmen are on deck to be, they have 2 to be at the the Kenai Mall. They'll have 2 in the Soldotna area and 2 down in Homer to assist in the event somebody maybe doesn't show up or something like that. But that's all I know as far as the primary goes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I know that the state of Alaska, Jamie, has put out a email that went out actually quite a while ago. In fact, I meant to mention it to you, that basically allows state workers to train for it as election officials and then be able to take off on election day to help man polls and stuff. So there's a resource pool out there fairly large that moving forward might be available. But anyway, I didn't know if you were aware of that or not.
I was not aware of that one. They did also put out a program like volunteer to adopt a precinct where your agency could get paid, I think, about $1,400 a day to send your employees over and be election officials for the day. I don't know what they needed to do. Carol Frias might actually be a better resource at this point. I'm pretty sure she's going to be the chair for Kenai Precinct number 1, which has always been at the Cars Mall, and we have relocated Kenai Precinct number 3, which used to always be at the Senior Center. We've relocated that to a different suite in the old Cars Mall for this year, given that the Senior Center is closed.
Okay, and will we be doing public outreach on that? Because I actually vote, that's where I vote, and I know a lot of people just by maybe muscle memory are going to drive over there on election day. So,
yeah, I'll work with Lori and confirm what kind of outreach they're going to do.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any other questions of the city clerk? Thank you, Jamie, and enjoy the rest of your vacation.
My quarantine?
Oh, your quarantine, staycation. Councilmember Glendenning.
Just one question. Maybe it's my old ears, but you're broken up a little bit when you talked about the petition that was submitted for the borough ordinance for vote by mail. Could you reprise that for me, please?
Ms. Hines?
The borough clerk certified the petition, and the question of whether that ordinance should be enacted will go to the voters on October 6th.
Yeah, so the petition that was floating around there was an action. The vote by mail is proved. It went through the veto the veto got overridden. So the petition to repeal that, I'm not exactly sure what the wording will be on the ballot, but the to essentially repeal that ordinance is certified. So that question will be on the borough ballot.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's correct.
Thank you.
It's called referring it to the voters. So referring enactment
Referral.
goes to.
Oh, refer. Instead of repealing, it's referral?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions of the city clerk? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to additional public comment. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time? Ms. Nelson. Is there anybody else from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time? Seeing none, we'll move to council comments. We'll start in the back of the room. Councilmember Glendenning.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I think our thoughts are focused on our friend and colleague, Gary Knopp. I knew him, met him in the oil field up at Prudhoe Bay, and we worked together collaborated on many things with projects or design review issues or cross-country pipelines, wellhead issues and whatnot, and we always had a good relationship. My son knew him when he was up there all those years ago. Christopher is your age, so when he was a young fellow just out of school, he was there, and he remembers Gary fondly too, as being firm but fair and clear in his direction, and he was able to complete his tasks in a safe and orderly manner. Gary will be missed, and I'm still processing what happened, and again. Thank you for your LUG really that you gave earlier this evening. That ends my comment.
Thank you, Councilman Glendenning, and also just wanted to say as we kind of go through this, we want to also recognize the other souls that were lost on that plane too. That wasn't, even though they were from out of state, certainly their families. We'll miss them, and our thoughts and prayers go out to their families also. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I want to thank Paul. I actually, at the airport, I was there when the guy was putting it up over the weekend or whatever night that, and so I got to see part of it as it was going up. And so the airport is looking better and better every day. And so hopefully it'll look better when there's a lot of people coming in and out of it again. I'm looking forward for the new operator and see what that looks like and what opportunities. But I'm thankful for Grant for what they're doing at this point and keeping some openings. I too, I want to talk about the plane crash that took lives of 2 of our local pilots. And citizens, and also the family. I think it was the Husey family from South Carolina, and send my condolences to them too. And I know, it's pretty sad that their parents had been over. They were on the flight just before them, and were waiting for them and to come over and that had to been very tough, and so I give their family, but I also want to thank all the people. I mean, I heard, when something like this happens, we'd rather it didn't happen, but it's just like there were other companies and pilots that flew some of those family members back and got them back over to this side and helped out the charter and the others, and that's just what Alaskans do in a tough spot, and it was nice to see that kind of help and response. But of course, when you have the Bell family that have been around here, and like you said, even his brother Mark and that, so it's tough all over. And then we come to Representative Gary Knopp, and like you said, not only was he our representative for this area, Kenai, Soldotna, and that, and as the mayor stated, he did his job that I can say I'm proud of how he did it. That he didn't let the party or politics say, here's what you need to do. He did what was right for Alaskans and his community, and he should be remembered for that. And I'm going to miss him. I worked with him both in him doing jobs for our company and knowing him personally on that front, and Helen, and going to dinner a number of times, as the mayor said, just to have a discussion, not to talk, not be there to say, hey, you need to do this and you need to do that. It was more just having a good time and enjoying life, and Gary and Helen couldn't do that. And so my condolences to Helen, and I think it's Saturday at noon. at the Catholic Church in Soldotna is when the service will be, and I know then and in Soldotna they're going to put some tents up at the Hutchings Auto Spa, and so after the service people can social distance and still mingle and say thank you, so, and give their condolences. So again, it's just very tough when you lose two good people right here on the Kenai, that means. And I guess I shouldn't forget, I think the guide that was over there, I don't know where the Rogers family is from. I think that was his Dave Rogers. But again, we can't forget there were 7 lives lost that day, and so thank you for that moment of silence at the beginning of our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarre. Councilmember Petty.
The loss of those dear souls are irreplaceable, and the families, they have my greatest respect and condolences, and thank you for all of the words that were said tonight to offer comfort and respect and honor to those who have gone on before us. And so Representative Knopp was a man of great integrity who had great composure when he faced harsh opposition, and so he leaves a legacy of an example that the rest of us could greatly learn from, and so he will be greatly missed, as well as the other souls. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Petty. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, I was also shocked and sick Friday morning to hear what happened, and also want to thank you for the moment of silence and your, really eloquent comments about the losses of Gary Knopp and Gary Bell and the guide and the families from South Carolina, and appreciate Councilmember Petty's comments and my other colleagues' comments about this. Just a terrible situation to have, and takes a while for people to deal with. And also want to say that once again, I commend the administration and all the departments that worked on the dibnet fishery this season. Once again, I didn't receive any email or phone call from anyone with any complaint about it, which was like last year. I think things have the process that's been developed and the management tools and the way it's run over the last the time we've been dealing with has really shown a lot of benefit this year. I think that the one concern I had was, what spikes might be happening in other communities or whatever relating to our COVID discussion from concentrating all the people. I think that, we don't know that outcome, but I was impressed that, everybody wants to catch their fish and come to our area to do it, and that we had more higher revenues than the past 2 years, more people here doing that. So I think that was great, and I appreciate the protections that, were for staff and the hand washing stations and everything like that. I thought that was really good. The other thing I wanted to say has to do with, it took a number of years to get a deputy clerk. In the budget, it took a long time, a number of years to get that. Today, I'm really happy about that. I really think the clerk's office has done a great job supporting us through all these meetings and supporting the commissions too, going to Zoom and everything. And we can have our clerk in quarantine and no hiccup at all with our meeting with our deputy clerk here, and I think that's fantastic. So I just want to say thank you and kudos. Thanks.
Councilmember Naxton.
You know, Mayor, sometimes speaking last is the most difficult thing to do, you know, while you wait. And this horrific aircraft accident has been weighing on me heavily since that day, and I'm still sorting it out. Here I'm talking about myself, but that's, you know, that's how I feel. But, you know, I knew both pilots. I knew Gary well, and Greg, I talked with him on the radio, known him for 30 years or more. I'm not sure, you know. But Gary, you know, you reflect on people's lives and how they impact you and what you think of them. And when I think of Gary, well, when I think, a lot of people think of him, they'll remember him as Representative Gary Knopp, you know, this political position that, you know, maybe that defines the person. And for me, Gary moved into politics, but really the Gary I know is the guy I met on an excavator or a backhoe, a dirt guy, and a man that it was in a stressful type of job that you never knew it. I never heard him use a cuss word or lose his cool. Not really, you know, and just a super fine guy that way. He joined the Civil Air Patrol when I was commander. We flew a lot together. He was an experienced. He was a CFI, multi-engine. He's got a couple airplanes, you know, all that. We flew quite a bit together, you know, and when you do that, you get to know somebody in a confined space. And to me, you know, that's the Gary Knopp that I lost. I basically, when he ran for borough assembly, I told him I thought he was out of his gourd. Why would you do that? You know, you got all this stuff, and politics gets in the way of work and stuff. And he, frankly, he surprised me quite a bit on how he handled that. But the politics end of it at the borough, and then he became the borough assembly president. But listening to him, you know, it's like, well, this is the Gary I know, and he carried that through to the borough, and I think on from there. And he's always going to have my respect just for the man that he was, and terribly missed. And his wife Helen, she's probably one of the smartest people I know, you know, and she's fun. She giggles a lot and all of that. And at first, you know, but she, you know, I just, my heart goes out to her and the family, and you know, also the Bells, you know, long term, and all of these people have touched a lot of people in our community, and it's you know, it's more than a sad day. It's I don't know what it's going to take to get over that, but anyway, on we go.
Thank you, Henry, and that was probably a good way to close out our meeting this evening. Seeing no other business before this body, we are adjourned.